At 18 years old, still untouched by any man, Lila Keene was handed over like livestock to a stranger, a grieving widower with 3 broken children and a ranch full of ghosts. Her father called it survival. The town called it mercy. But what unfolded in that frozen Montana wilderness would shock everyone who witnessed it. This is the story of a girl who was given away, and the man who learned that love cannot be bargained for. It must be earned. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The stagecoach lurched violently over another frozen rut, and Lila Keene's head cracked against the wooden frame hard enough to make her vision swim. She didn't cry out. She'd learned weeks ago that crying changed nothing. Not her father's decision, not her destination, not the cold knot of terror that had taken up permanent residence in her chest. Outside the frost-covered window, Montana territory stretched endlessly in every direction, a white, unforgiving expanse broken only by skeletal trees and the occasional drift of smoke from some distant homestead. February 1883 had teeth, and it was biting down hard. "Not much further now, miss," the driver called back, his voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around his face. "Willow Bend's just over the next rise." Willow Bend. The name sounded gentle, pastoral even, nothing like the reality Lila had been sold into. She pressed her gloved hand against the cold glass and watched her breath fog the view. 18 years old. Still a virgin, though her father had made certain to mention that fact to Mr. Ward's representative, as if her innocence added value to the transaction, like an unblemished hide or an unbroken horse. "He's a good man, Lila," her father had said 3 weeks ago, unable to meet her eyes as he spoke. Caleb Ward. His wife died birthing their 3rd child last winter. He needs help with the young ones, and he's offering us his protection. You know what that means out here. She knew. Protection meant survival. It meant her father's small, failing farm wouldn't be swallowed by the Thornton Cattle Company, which had been buying up, or burning out, every small homesteader in the valley. It meant her 2 younger brothers might actually see spring without starving. It meant her mother might stop coughing blood into her handkerchief every morning. The price for all that was simple. Lila herself. "I won't do it," she'd said, her voice shaking but firm. "I won't marry a stranger." Her father had finally looked at her then, and what she saw in his eyes was worse than anger. It was resignation, defeat. "You will," he'd said softly, "because if you don't, we'll all be dead before summer." So here she was, rattling toward a future she hadn't chosen, about to become a wife to a man she'd never met, and a mother to children who would surely hate her for trying to replace the woman they'd lost. The stagecoach crested the rise, and Willow Bend emerged from the white landscape like a promise or a threat. Lila couldn't decide which. It was smaller than she'd expected, just a main street lined with rough-hewn buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church with a crooked steeple, and what looked like a schoolhouse. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys, and a few bundled figures moved between the buildings like dark smudges on paper. "That's the depot there," the driver announced, pointing with his whip toward a low building at the end of the street. "Mr. Ward said he'd be waiting." Lila's stomach dropped. Of course he would be waiting. She was expected, purchased, promised. The stagecoach pulled to a stop with a final violent jerk, and the driver climbed down to open her door. The cold hit her like a fist, sharp, brutal, stealing the breath from her lungs. She'd thought Illinois was cold, but Montana was something else entirely. This cold had malice in it. "There's your man," the driver said, nodding toward the depot porch. Lila forced herself to look. Caleb Ward stood with his back to the depot wall, one boot propped against the weathered wood, hat held in work-roughened hands. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, and lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate little. His face was all angles and shadow beneath dark hair that needed cutting, and even from a distance, Lila could see the weariness etched into his features. He looked older than 27. Grief did that, she supposed, but it was his eyes that caught her. Sky blue, even in the gray light of a winter afternoon, cautious, guarded, and fixed directly on her with an intensity that made her feel suddenly, acutely visible. Behind him, 3 small figures huddled close. The children. "Miss Keene," Caleb Ward said as she approached, his voice rough as gravel on a dirt road. "Welcome to Willow Bend." Up close, she could see more details. The healing cut above his left eyebrow, the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many harsh sunrises, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched as if he was grinding down words he couldn't say. His hands, she noticed, were scarred and capable looking. Working hands. "Mr. Ward," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for meeting me." What else was there to say? Thank you for buying me? Thank you for saving my family by taking me off their hands? An awkward silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind howling down the main street and the soft whimper of the smallest child. A baby, really, couldn't be more than a year old, bundled so thoroughly in blankets that only her red, tear-streaked face was visible. "These are my children," Caleb said, and something in his voice softened fractionally. "This here's Eli." He placed a hand on the shoulder of the oldest child, a boy of about 8 with his father's dark hair and his mother's, Lila guessed, delicate features. The boy stared at her with open hostility, his jaw set in a miniature version of his father's stubborn line. "Clara." The middle child was a little girl, perhaps 5, with tangled blonde curls escaping from beneath her knit cap. She clutched a faded shawl, her mother's, Lila realized with a pang, and wouldn't meet Lila's eyes. "And this is Rosie," Caleb finished, gesturing to the baby in the arms of an older woman Lila hadn't noticed before. The woman was perhaps 50, gray-haired and sturdy, with the no-nonsense look of someone who'd raised her own brood and wasn't particularly impressed by much anymore. "I'm Mrs. Hawkins," the woman said, her voice crisp. "Been helping out since Margaret passed. I'll stay on a few more days to help you settle, miss, but after that, these young ones are your concern." "I understand," Lila said, though she didn't. Not really. How was she supposed to mother 3 children when she was barely more than a child herself? Rosie chose that moment to let out a wail that could have shattered glass. Mrs. Hawkins jiggled her automatically, but the baby only cried harder, her face turning an alarming shade of purple. "She's been fussy all day," Mrs. Hawkins said apologetically. "Might be cutting teeth again." "Here." Before she could second-guess herself, Lila stepped forward and held out her arms. "May I?" Mrs. Hawkins looked surprised but handed the baby over. Rosie was heavier than Lila expected, solid and warm despite the cold, and she smelled of milk and the faint sweetness of baby skin. The wailing continued for a moment, but Lila began to sway gently, humming under her breath, an old lullaby her own mother had sung to her brothers when they were small. Gradually, miraculously, Rosie's cries subsided to hiccuping whimpers, then to silence. She blinked up at Lila with enormous blue eyes, her father's eyes, and something in Lila's chest cracked open just a little. When she looked up, she found Caleb watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Something like surprise, maybe, or hope, or fear. "We should get you to the ranch," he said abruptly, breaking the moment. "It's a 40-minute ride and there's more weather coming in." The ranch. Her new home. The place where she would live out the rest of her days as Mrs. Caleb Ward, mother to children who weren't hers, wife to a man who'd loved someone else. "Of course," Lila said, holding Rosie a little closer as the wind picked up. "I'm ready." But she wasn't. She wasn't ready at all. The Ward Ranch materialized from the white landscape like something out of a fever dream. It was larger than Lila had expected. A sprawling 2-story house built of rough-cut timber, flanked by a barn, a stable, a chicken coop, and several smaller outbuildings she couldn't identify. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys, and a dog barked frantically at their approach before Caleb's sharp whistle silenced it. "This is home," Caleb said simply, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. He climbed down and came around to help her, his hands firm and steady as he gripped her waist and lifted her down as if she weighed nothing. The contact was over in a second, but Lila felt it burn through all her layers like a brand. This man was her husband, or would be in a few short hours. Mrs. Hawkins had gone ahead with the children, and now the front door stood open, spilling lamplight onto the snow. Caleb grabbed Lila's single trunk. Everything she owned in the world fit in one modest trunk, and gestured for her to follow. Inside, the house was warm and smelled of wood smoke, baking bread, and something else, something floral and faintly sweet that seemed to linger in the very walls. Margaret loved lavender, Caleb said quietly, as if reading her mind. She dried it every summer, Kept it in little sachets throughout the house. I haven't had the heart to clear them out. Lila nodded, understanding immediately. She was entering a shrine. Every corner of this house would be haunted by the woman who'd come before her, the woman who'd been truly loved, truly chosen. Everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of Margaret Ward, the delicate embroidery on the cushions, the carefully arranged dried flowers in a blue vase, the portraits on the wall showing a beautiful blonde woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was lovely, Lila said softly. She was, Caleb agreed, his voice rough with old grief. Then he seemed to catch himself, as if realizing how that sounded. I'll show you to your room. We can talk about arrangements after you've rested. Her room. Separate from his, she realized, with a mixture of relief and something else she couldn't quite name. Disappointment? Ridiculous. She should be grateful for the reprieve. Caleb led her up the narrow stairs to the second floor. This was going to be the nursery, he said, opening a door at the end of the hall. But after Margaret died, I couldn't bring myself to finish it. Mrs. Hawkins helped me set it up for you instead. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a beautiful quilt, a washstand, a dresser with a cracked mirror, and a window that looked out over the snow-covered valley. It was spare, impersonal, but it was hers, the first space that had been truly hers since she'd left home. The necessaries out back, Caleb continued, his voice taking on the mechanical quality of someone reciting information he'd rehearsed. Water pumps in the kitchen. Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. Mrs. Hawkins has been managing most of the cooking, but she'll be leaving in a few days, so— I can cook, Lila interrupted, then immediately regretted her sharp tone. I mean, I learned. My mother taught me. I can manage. Caleb nodded, but his expression remained closed, unreadable. The ceremony is set for tomorrow afternoon. My brother Samuel is writing in to witness. Mrs. Hawkins will stand with you, if that's acceptable. Tomorrow afternoon. Less than 24 hours until she would become Mrs. Ward in truth and law. That's acceptable, Lila said, because what else could she say? Caleb set her trunk down at the foot of the bed, then stood there awkwardly, as if unsure what came next. In the dim lamplight, Lila could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face, the way his broad shoulders sagged under the weight of more than physical labor. Mr. Ward, she said quietly, I want you to know, I understand this situation isn't what either of us would have chosen, but I'll do my best by your children. I promise you that. Something flickered in his blue eyes, surprise again, perhaps, or gratitude. I know you will, he said. Your father spoke highly of you, said you were strong, capable, good with your brothers. A silence stretched between them, loaded with everything they couldn't say. Finally, Caleb cleared his throat. I'll let you rest. Supper's in an hour. Just come down when you're ready. He turned to leave, but Lila's voice stopped him. Mr. Ward? What should I call you? I mean, in front of the children? He paused at the door, his back to her. Caleb, he said softly. Just Caleb. And I'll call you Lila, if that suits. It suits, she whispered, but he was already gone, his heavy footsteps receding down the hall. Alone, Lila sank onto the bed and let herself feel, just for a moment, the full weight of her fear and uncertainty. Tomorrow she would be a wife, a mother, the mistress of a household and a ranch she knew nothing about. Tomorrow her life as Lila Keene would end, and her life as Lila Ward would begin. But tonight, in this quiet room with the wind howling outside, she was still herself. Still 18, still terrified, still a virgin being given to a stranger, with nothing but her father's promise that it would somehow all work out. The door creaked open, and Lila looked up to find Clara standing in the hallway, Margaret's faded shawl still clutched in her small hands. The little girl stared at Lila with enormous, solemn eyes. Are you my new mama? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lila's throat tightened. I don't know, sweetheart. I suppose so, in a way. Clara's face crumpled. I don't want a new mama. I want my real mama back. Before Lila could respond, the little girl turned and fled down the hall, her sobs echoing through the house. A moment later, she heard Caleb's low voice, soothing, comforting, and Clara's muffled crying against what must be her father's chest. Lila closed her eyes and fought back her own tears. This was going to be so much harder than she'd imagined. These children didn't need her, they needed their mother. And Caleb didn't want a wife. He wanted the woman he'd buried less than a year ago. She was a placeholder, a convenience, a means to an end, and somehow she was going to have to find a way to make that enough. Supper was an exercise in awkward silence, punctuated by the scrape of forks on plates and Rosie's occasional babbling. They sat around a large wooden table in the kitchen, Caleb at the head, Mrs. Hawkins to his right, Lila to his left, and the children scattered between them like small, wary sentinels. The food was simple but well prepared. Venison stew with root vegetables, thick slices of bread still warm from the oven, and coffee so strong Lila's eyes watered when she took her first sip. She ate mechanically, aware of Eli's hostile stare across the table and Clara's occasional furtive glances. Lila was raised on a farm outside Galena, Caleb said suddenly, clearly trying to break the tension. Her father grows corn and raises hogs. Did grow, Lila corrected quietly. The drought last summer nearly wiped him out. That's why. She trailed off, unwilling to finish the sentence in front of the children. That's why he sold me to your father, Mrs. Hawkins made a sympathetic noise. Hard times everywhere, she said. We've been lucky here. Mr. Ward's a good manager, knows how to make the most of what the land gives him. But the Thorntons have been making trouble, trying to force the smaller ranchers to sell. They've been making more than trouble, Caleb said grimly. Last month, 3 homesteads burned. Convenient accidents, Thornton called them. Papa says Thornton's men are cowards, Eli piped up, his first word since Lila had arrived. He says they hide behind the law because they're too yellow to fight fair. Eli, Caleb warned, but there was no real heat in it. Well, you did say that, Eli insisted, his chin jutting out stubbornly. Caleb sighed, and for the first time Lila saw a flicker of something like humor in his expression. I did, but that doesn't mean you need to repeat everything you hear. I only repeat the good stuff, Eli said, and Mrs. Hawkins snorted into her coffee. The moment of levity broke some of the tension, and the meal continued with slightly less painful silence. Lila learned that Eli was supposed to be attending the schoolhouse in town, but had been missing classes to help with ranch work. Clara liked to draw, and had covered half the walls in her room with sketches of horses and flowers. Rosie was indeed teething and had taken to chewing on anything she could get her hands on, including, to Mrs. Hawkins' dismay, the corner of a very expensive ledger Caleb used for bookkeeping. She's got your stubbornness, Caleb, Mrs. Hawkins said fondly. Won't take no for an answer once she's got her mind set on something. Wonder where she gets that, Caleb murmured. But there was a softness in his voice when he looked at his youngest daughter that made Lila's chest ache. He'd loved their mother, she realized. Loved her deeply, completely. And now he was marrying a girl young enough to be his daughter, not out of desire or even affection, but out of necessity. For his children, for his ranch, for survival. It should have made her angry, but instead it made her sad. Sad for him, for the children, for the ghost of Margaret Ward who seemed to hover in every corner of this house. And sad for herself, too, for the girl she'd been just weeks ago, who'd still believed she might have a choice in how her life unfolded. After supper, Mrs. Hawkins supervised the children's bedtime routine, while Caleb disappeared into his study to work on accounts. Lila offered to help with the dishes, and the older woman accepted with a grateful nod. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Lila washing and Mrs. Hawkins drying, the only sound the splash of water and the clink of plates. You're scared, Mrs. Hawkins said finally. It wasn't a question. Lila's hand stilled in the water. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been paying attention. Mrs. Hawkins set down the plate, let down the plate she'd been drying and turned to look at Lila directly. Listen to me, child. Caleb Ward is a good man, one of the best I've known, but he's hurting something fierce. Margaret's death nearly broke him. Only reason he's still standing is those children up there. I know, Lila whispered. Do you? Mrs. Hawkins' eyes were shrewd. Because I need you to understand something. Those children need a mother, but they need time too. Time to grieve. Time to learn to trust again. And Caleb needs, well, he needs someone who will be patient with him, with all of them. I'll try, Lila said, and meant it. Mrs. Hawkins patted her shoulder. That's all anyone can ask. Now, about tomorrow. The ceremony won't be fancy. Pastor Williams will come out from town, say a few words, you'll sign the register, and that'll be that. Caleb's not much for fuss. Neither am I, Lila said. Good. Mrs. Hawkins resumed drying the dishes. Wear something simple. Caleb wouldn't notice if you wore a burlap sack, truth be told, but it's your wedding day. You should feel, well, special isn't the right word, is it? But dignified, at least. Lila nodded, though the word wedding made her stomach clench. This wouldn't be like the weddings she'd dreamed about as a little girl. No white dress, no flowers, no guests laughing and dancing. Just a transaction made legal, witnessed by near strangers, performed out of necessity rather than love. Later, lying in her narrow bed in the small room at the end of the hall, Lila stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around her. She could hear the wind outside, the creak of old timber, the distant sound of Rosie fussing before falling back asleep. Somewhere below, Caleb's steady footsteps moved from room to room, checking locks, banking fires, performing the nightly rituals of a man responsible for more than just himself. Tomorrow, she would become his wife. Tomorrow, her innocence, the one thing her father had valued enough to mention explicitly, would be what? Given? Taken? Shared? No. Caleb had said there would be no expectations, that she would have her own space until she was ready. Ready for what, she wondered? Ready to replace the woman whose presence still permeated every inch of this house? Ready to share a bed with a man she didn't know, didn't love, had never chosen? Ready to become someone she wasn't sure she knew how to be? Lila pulled the beautiful quilt, Margaret's handiwork, no doubt, up to her chin and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. All she could do was survive it, and try not to disappoint the people who were depending on her. Outside, the Montana wind howled like something hungry, and Lila wondered if she would ever stop feeling so utterly, completely alone. She woke to silence and the pale gray light of dawn filtering through her window. For a moment, disoriented, Lila couldn't remember where she was. Then it came rushing back. Montana. The ranch. Caleb Ward. Today. Her wedding day. Lila dressed in her best dress, a simple dark blue wool that her mother had made for her last birthday. It wasn't bridal, but it was clean and well made, and the color brought out the green in her hazel eyes. She pinned up her dark hair as neatly as she could, though wayward curls immediately began escaping. Her hands shook as she worked. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Hawkins already in the kitchen, preparing what looked like enough food for a small army. The smell of frying bacon and fresh biscuits made Lila's empty stomach clench. "There you are," Mrs. Hawkins said briskly. "Eat something, child. You look pale as milk." "I'm not hungry." "Eat anyway. You'll need your strength." The words carried an implication that made Lila's face flush hot. Mrs. Hawkins noticed and softened. "I meant for dealing with the children later," she said gently. "That's all." Lila forced down half a biscuit and some coffee while Mrs. Hawkins bustled about, talking to fill the silence. "Samuel Ward arrived about an hour ago, Caleb's brother. Good man, bit rough around the edges, but his heart's in the right place. Pastor Williams should be here by noon. The ceremony will be short and then we'll have a small meal. Nothing fancy, but decent." "Where's Caleb?" Lila asked. "Out doing the morning chores. Cows don't care if it's a man's wedding day. They still need tending." Mrs. Hawkins smiled. "He'll be in soon to clean up." The morning crawled by with excruciating slowness. Lila helped Mrs. Hawkins with the meal preparation, played half-heartedly with Clara, who seemed slightly less hostile than the day before, and tried not to think about what the afternoon would bring. Eli had made himself scarce, and Rosie was mercifully napping. At 11:30, a knock at the door announced Pastor Williams' arrival. He was a thin, balding man with kind eyes and a gentle manner, and he greeted Lila with genuine warmth. "Miss Keene," he said, taking her hand, "or should I say, soon-to-be Mrs. Ward. I've known Caleb since he first came to Willow Bend 10 years ago. You're marrying a fine man." "Thank you," Lila managed. "Caleb's upstairs changing," Samuel Ward said, appearing from the direction of the study. He was taller than his brother, broader through the shoulders, with the same blue eyes but a more open expression. "Should be down shortly." "No rush," the pastor said mildly. "These things should not be hurried." But Lila wanted it hurried, wanted it over, wanted to wake up on the other side of this moment and find that somehow, impossibly, everything had worked out fine. When Caleb appeared at the top of the stairs, Lila's breath caught despite herself. He'd cleaned up, shaved, combed his dark hair back from his forehead, and changed into what was clearly his best shirt and trousers. He looked younger somehow, less burdened, though his eyes still carried that deep well of grief and weariness. He came down the stairs slowly, his gaze fixed on Lila. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. This man and this girl, about to bind their lives together for reasons that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. "You look lovely," Caleb said quietly, and Lila thought he might actually mean it. "Thank you," she whispered. "You look very nice as well." Samuel snorted. "High praise indeed. Come on, brother. Let's get you married before you lose your nerve." "I'm not the one who should be nervous," Caleb muttered, but there was no malice in it. They gathered in the parlor, the same room where Margaret and Caleb must have spent countless evenings, where Margaret had probably nursed all 3 babies, where her laughter had once filled the air. The children clustered near Mrs. Hawkins, watching with solemn faces. Clara had brought her mother's shawl, Lila noticed, and held it like a lifeline. Pastor Williams opened his worn Bible and began to speak. The words washed over Lila in a blur: love, honor, cherish, sickness, health, death. Such enormous promises, made in a quiet parlor in the middle of nowhere, witnessed by strangers and children who wished she didn't exist. "Do you, Caleb Andrew Ward, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Caleb said firmly, his eyes on Lila's face. "And do you, Lila Rose Keene, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" This was it, her last chance to refuse, to run, to choose a different path, even if that path led to nowhere. She thought of her father's desperate eyes, her mother's coughing, her brother's hollow cheeks. She thought of Claire's tears and Rosie's need and Eli's brittle defiance. She thought of Caleb Ward, a widower with a broken heart, trying to hold his world together with scarred, capable hands. "I do," Lila heard herself say. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife." Pastor Williams closed his Bible. "Caleb, you may kiss your bride." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Caleb looked at her, a question in his blue eyes, and Lila gave the tiniest nod. Just get it over with, she thought. Let this moment pass. He leaned in slowly, carefully, as if afraid she might bolt. His lips brushed against hers, brief, chaste, almost brotherly. It was over in a heartbeat, but Lila felt it everywhere, a spark of something she couldn't name and didn't want to examine. "Congratulations," Samuel said heartily, clapping his brother on the shoulder. "Welcome to the family, Lila." Mrs. Hawkins was crying into her apron. "Beautiful ceremony," she sniffled. "Just beautiful." Eli looked mutinous. Clara clung to her mother's shawl and wouldn't look at Lila at all. Rosie, blessedly oblivious, babbled happily in Mrs. Hawkins' arms. And just like that, Lila Keene became Lila Ward. The transaction was complete. The bargain sealed. She was married to a stranger, mother to children who resented her, mistress of a house haunted by the woman she could never replace. She was 18 years old, still a virgin, and absolutely terrified. But she was also, she realized with a strange, fierce determination, still standing, still here, still fighting. And that, she decided, would have to be enough. For now, at least. For now. The wedding meal passed in a haze of forced pleasantries and awkward silences. Mrs. Hawkins had outdone herself. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes swimming in butter, green beans from last summer's canning, and an apple pie that would have made any bride proud under different circumstances. But Lila could barely taste any of it. Every bite turned to sawdust in her mouth as she felt the weight of her new reality settling over her like a shroud. Samuel tried his best to keep the conversation flowing, regaling them with stories about a particularly ornery bull he'd been trying to break, and Pastor Williams chuckled politely in all the right places. Caleb ate methodically, his attention divided between his plate and his children, who picked at their food with matching expressions of misery. So, Lila, Samuel said, pouring himself another glass of cider. Caleb tells me you're from Illinois. Must be quite a change coming out to Montana territory. Yes, Lila managed, grateful for the direct question. Everything is so much bigger here, more open, more honest, too, Samuel said. Out here, you know where you stand. A man's word means something. His handshake is his bond. He raised his glass toward his brother. Caleb's word is good as gold, always has been. Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Samuel, what? Can a man praise his own brother at his wedding dinner? Samuel's eyes twinkled with mischief, but there was genuine affection beneath it. I'm just saying, you picked a good one, Lila, even if the circumstances are, well, unconventional. The word hung in the air like smoke. Unconventional. Such a gentle way to describe what had happened. A desperate father selling his daughter, a grieving widower buying a wife out of necessity, 3 children forced to accept a replacement for the mother they'd loved. I think we all understand the circumstances, Mrs. Hawkins said firmly, shooting Samuel a look. And I think we can all agree that sometimes life doesn't give us the choices we'd prefer, but we make the best of what we're given. Amen to that, Pastor Williams murmured. Eli suddenly threw down his fork with enough force to make everyone jump. May I be excused? He asked, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Caleb studied his son for a long moment. Clear your plate first. I'm not hungry. Clear it anyway, then you may go. The boy's jaw clenched, and for a moment Lila thought he might refuse outright. But something in his father's steady gaze made him reconsider. He grabbed his plate and carried it to the kitchen with deliberate angry movements, then stalked toward the stairs without another word. Eli! Caleb called after him, warning in his tone. The boy paused, his back rigid. What? We'll talk later. About your manners. Eli didn't respond, just continued up the stairs. A moment later, the sound of a slamming door echoed through the house. I'm sorry, Caleb said, though whether he was apologizing to Lila, the guests, or the world in general wasn't clear. He's having a hard time with everything. He's 8 years old and his mother died, Lila said quietly. I'd be angry too. Something flickered across Caleb's face, surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but Clara chose that moment to burst into tears. I want Mama, the little girl sobbed, her face crumpling. I want my real Mama back. Mrs. Hawkins immediately gathered her up, making soothing sounds, but Clara's wails only intensified. Now, sweetheart, hush now. I won't hush. I want Mama. I don't want her. Clara pointed an accusing finger at Lila, and the naked hatred in that small gesture was like a knife to the chest. The room fell into mortified silence. Pastor Williams studied his plate with intense fascination. Samuel cleared his throat and reached for more chicken. Caleb's face had gone pale, his knuckles white where he gripped his fork. Clara Rose Ward, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. That is enough. But the little girl was beyond reason now, lost in her grief and rage. She struggled in Mrs. Hawkins' arms, still pointing at Lila, still screaming, You're not my mama. You'll never be my mama. I hate you. Claire, I hate you. I wish you'd never come here. I wish... That's enough. Caleb's voice cracked through the room like thunder, and Clara fell silent, shocked into hiccuping sobs. Even Rosie, who'd been contentedly mashing potatoes into her hair, went still. Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Mrs. Hawkins, would you take the children upstairs, please? I think they need some quiet time. Of course. Mrs. Hawkins, still holding the now whimpering Clara, managed to scoop up Rosie as well. Come along, darlings. Let's go have a nice rest, shall we? As she shepherded the children out, Clara's sobs could be heard all the way up the stairs and down the hall. Then another door closed, and silence fell again. Lila stared at her plate, fighting back the hot sting of tears. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of these people who were essentially strangers, no matter what legal document now bound her to them. Well, Samuel said into the awkward quiet, children say the darndest things, don't they? Samuel, Caleb said wearily, don't. I was just trying to... I know what you were trying to do, don't. Pastor Williams rose from the table with the air of a man grateful for an escape. I should be heading back to town. Long ride and there's weather coming in. He offered Lila a kind smile. Mrs. Ward, it was lovely to meet you. I hope to see you at services soon. Mrs. Ward. The name felt foreign, ill-fitting, like a dress made for someone else's body. Thank you, Pastor, Lila managed, for everything. After the pastor left, Samuel lingered long enough to help clear the table, then made his own excuses about needing to get back to his own ranch before dark. He shook Caleb's hand, kissed Lila's cheek with brotherly affection that surprised her, and was gone. Suddenly, the house felt very large and very empty. Just Lila and Caleb standing in the kitchen surrounded by the debris of their wedding meal, with 3 grieving children somewhere upstairs and a ghost woman's presence still hanging heavy in every corner. I should check on them, Caleb said finally, not meeting her eyes. The children. Make sure Clara's calmed down. Of course. Lila, He trailed off, then tried again. What she said? It wasn't right. I'll speak to her. She's grieving, Lila said softly. Children grieve by getting angry. I understand that. Understanding doesn't make it hurt less. His blue eyes finally met hers, and in them she saw a complexity of emotions she couldn't begin to untangle. I'm sorry this isn't what you expected. Any of this. What I expected stopped mattering the day my father told me I was coming here, Lila said, and was surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. This is reality now, for both of us. Caleb nodded slowly. I suppose it is. He moved toward the stairs, then paused. About tonight. Lila's stomach clenched. Here it was, the conversation she'd been dreading. I meant what I said yesterday, Caleb continued, still not looking at her. About expectations. About giving you space. I know this marriage isn't... I know you didn't choose this. Didn't choose me, so I won't. That is, I don't expect... He stopped, clearly struggling. Your room is your own. I won't intrude on it. Not until you say otherwise. Relief and something else. Disappointment? Confusion? Ward in her chest. Thank you, she whispered. It's not kindness, Lila. It's just decent. It's just being decent. He finally looked at her fully. You're 18 years old. You should be courted properly, choosing your own future. Instead, you're here, married to a widower old enough to be, nearly old enough to be your father, saddled with children who hate you and a house full of ghosts. The least I can do is give you the dignity of choice in the one thing I can control. The words, meant to be considerate, somehow made everything worse. They highlighted exactly how transactional this all was, how loveless, how fundamentally broken from the start. I appreciate that, Lila said, because what else could she say? Truly. Caleb nodded once more, then headed upstairs, leaving Lila alone in the kitchen with a table full of dirty dishes and the ruins of her wedding day. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her, the creak of floorboards above, the tick of the mantel clock in the parlor, the wind beginning to pick up outside. Then, methodically, she began to clean up. This was her life now. She might as well start living it. The next few days established a rhythm that was equal parts exhausting and mind-numbing. Mrs. Hawkins stayed on to help with the transition, showing Lila the household routines, the children's preferences, the peculiarities of the ancient cast-iron stove that required specific coaxing to maintain an even temperature. Caleb spent most of his time outside, working the ranch from dawn until well past dark. When he came in for meals, he was polite but distant, speaking to Lila only about practical matters, whether they needed more firewood brought in, if the supplies from town had arrived, how Rosie's cough was progressing. He was careful never to touch her, never to stand too close, never to let their interactions venture into anything that might be considered intimate or personal. At night, she heard him moving through the house alone, checking locks and banking fires, and then the quiet click of his bedroom door closing. They lived like two strangers sharing a boarding house, their lives running parallel but never quite touching. The children were another matter entirely. Eli maintained his hostile silence, speaking to her only when absolutely necessary and then with the bare minimum of civility. He'd taken to spending as much time as possible outside with his father, learning ranch work with an intensity that seemed driven by more than just a boy's natural desire to emulate his father. It was as if he was trying to prove something, perhaps that he was the man of the house now, that Lila wasn't needed. Clara was less openly hostile, but no less wary. She shadowed Mrs. Hawkins constantly, refusing to let Lila help with her hair or clothing or any of the small intimacies of a mother's care. At night, Lila could hear her crying through the thin walls, soft, muffled sobs that tore at her heart, but which she had no idea how to comfort. Only Rosie seemed indifferent to the change. The baby accepted care from whoever was available. Mrs. Hawkins, Lila, even Caleb when he was inside, with equitable good humor. She was cutting another tooth, which made her cranky and clingy, but at least her rejection wasn't personal. At least with Rosie, Lila could pretend she was helping, making a difference, earning her place in this household. On the third day after the wedding, Mrs. Hawkins announced she would be leaving the following morning. "My own family needs me," she explained, rolling out dough for biscuits while Lila watched and tried to memorize every movement. "My daughter's expecting her third, and she'll need help when the baby comes. But you'll do fine, Lila. You're a quick learner." "I don't feel ready," Lila admitted quietly. "No one ever does." Mrs. Hawkins' hands never stopped their efficient movements. But ready or not, life keeps moving forward. You'll manage because you have to. That's how it works. That evening, Caleb gathered everyone in the parlor. It was the first time they'd all been in the same room since the disastrous wedding dinner, and the tension was thick enough to choke on. "Mrs. Hawkins is leaving tomorrow," Caleb announced, his hands clasped behind his back as he stood by the fireplace. He looked like a general addressing troops, Lila thought. Formal, distant. Which means some things are going to change around here. Eli crossed his arms. Clara hugged her mother's shawl tighter. Rosie chewed on a wooden spoon, oblivious. "Lila is my wife now," Caleb continued, and something in the way he said it, claiming her, defining her role, made her pulse quicken. "She's mistress of this house, and I expect you all to treat her with the respect that position deserves. That means no more sulking, no more refusing to speak to her, and absolutely no more outbursts like we saw at dinner." "But Papa," Eli started. "I'm not finished." Caleb's voice was firm, but not unkind. "I know this is hard. I know you miss your mother. God knows I miss her too, every single day. But she's gone and she's not coming back, and we have to find a way to keep living, all of us." Clara's lower lip trembled. "It's not fair." "No," Caleb agreed softly. "It's not fair. But it's what we have, and Lila is trying her best to help us, to take care of us. And she deserves better than what she's been getting." He looked at each of his children in turn, his gaze steady and serious. "Your mother would be ashamed of how you've treated her. She would want you to be kind, to be welcoming, to show the girl who's trying to be there for you the same grace your mother showed to everyone she met." The invocation of Margaret's wishes was a masterstroke. Eli's defiance wavered. Clara's tears spilled over, but they seemed less angry now, more helpless. Even Lila felt the power of it, the ghost of the perfect woman, the beloved wife and mother, being called upon to sanction her own replacement. "I don't want you to forget your mother," Caleb said, his voice roughening with emotion. "I never want that. But I also don't want you to punish someone who never did anything to hurt you. Can you understand that?" Silence stretched long and painful. Then, slowly, Eli nodded. It was a small gesture, reluctant and resentful, but it was something. "I'll try," the boy said finally, the words dragged out of him. "To be more, polite. That's all I'm asking." Caleb looked at Clara. "What about you, little bird?" Clara wiped her nose on her mother's shawl and nodded miserably. "I'll try too." "Good." Caleb's shoulders seemed to relax fractionally. "Now, off to bed with you. Tomorrow's a school day, Eli, and Mrs. Hawkins is leaving early. I want you all to say proper goodbyes." As the children filed out, each pausing to hug Mrs. Hawkins, Lila remained by the window, staring out at the darkness beyond. She heard Caleb see the children upstairs, heard his quiet words to each one, heard the doors close. Then his footsteps on the stairs, coming back down. "Thank you," Lila said without turning around. for what you said. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not so close that they touched. "They were being unfair. I won't tolerate that, no matter how much pain they're in. They're children. They're allowed to feel what they feel. They're allowed to feel it. They're not allowed to be cruel." He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again his voice was lower, more uncertain. Margaret was kind to everyone. It was her gift, seeing the good in people, making them feel worthy of love. I don't expect you to be her. I know that's impossible. But I also won't let them turn you into their enemy just because you're not her. Lila finally turned to look at him. In the firelight, his face was all plains and shadows, beautiful in a harsh, weathered way. "Do you resent me too?" she asked quietly. "For not being her." Caleb's throat worked as he swallowed. "I resent the whole damn situation," he admitted. "I resent that she died. I resent that I couldn't save her. I resent that I had to choose between my ranch failing and bringing you here. I resent that you're 18 years old and should be dancing at barn socials, not raising another woman's children." His blue eyes met hers. "But I don't resent you. That would be like resenting the sunrise for not being the sunset. You're just different, that's all." Different. Not better. Not worse. Just different. It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd said to her since she arrived. "For what it's worth," Lila said, "I resent it too, all of it. But I'm here, and I'm going to do my best. That's all I can promise." "That's all anyone can do." He shifted as if to leave, then paused. "Lila? About what I said. About expectations. I meant it. But if there ever comes a time when you feel differently about the arrangement, you can tell me. I won't assume anything, but I also won't say no if you want things to change." The implication was clear. Their marriage was unconsummated, would remain so indefinitely, but the door was open if she ever decided otherwise. The choice was hers. It should have felt liberating. Instead, it just felt lonely. "Good night, Caleb," she said softly. "Good night, Lila." He left, and she remained by the window, watching the darkness and wondering how long a person could live in this strange limbo between married and not, between mother and stranger, between hope and resignation. Mrs. Hawkins departed the next morning with much tearful goodbyes from the children and practical advice for Lila. "Remember to check the stock twice daily. The chickens are broody this time of year, so watch for them trying to hide their eggs. And don't let that stove intimidate you. It's cantankerous, but it'll behave if you're firm with it." "I'll remember," Lila promised, though her head was spinning with all the information she was supposed to retain. "And Lila?" Mrs. Hawkins took her hands, her weathered face soft with something like affection. "Give them time, all of them. It'll get easier." But it didn't get easier. Not at first. That first day alone with the children and the household was a disaster. Lila burned the oatmeal at breakfast, forgot to add salt to the bread dough, and had to chase 3 escaped chickens around the yard while Eli watched with barely concealed amusement. Clara refused to let Lila brush her hair, resulting in a tangled mess that made the little girl cry and Lila feel utterly incompetent. Rosie developed a rash that Lila had no idea how to treat and spent most of the afternoon screaming inconsolably. By the time Caleb came in for supper, exhausted and dirt-streaked from a day of mending fences, Lila was ready to collapse. She'd managed to pull together a meal, barely, but it was nothing like Mrs. Hawkins' cooking. The chicken was tough, the potatoes were underdone, and the gravy had lumps in it. Caleb ate without complaint, but she could see him registering each failure, each small way she fell short of what Margaret had been. "It's fine," he said when she apologized. "Better than what I could manage." The damning faintness of his praise made her want to cry. That night, after the children were finally blessedly asleep, Lila sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands and let the tears come. She cried for her lost home, her family, her girlhood. She cried for the life she'd never have, the choices that had been stripped from her. She cried because she was tired and scared and so desperately lonely she could barely breathe. She didn't hear Caleb come downstairs. Didn't know he was there until his hand, rough and warm, settled gently on her shoulder. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey, it's all right." "It's not all right," Lila sobbed, too exhausted to maintain her composure. Nothing is all right. I can't cook, I can't manage the house. The children hate me and I have no idea what I'm doing. Mrs. Hawkins made it look so easy, but it's not. It's not easy at all. First days never are. His hand remained on her shoulder, steady and strangely comforting. My first day trying to run this place after Margaret died. I set the barn on fire, trying to light a lantern, lost 2 heifers because I forgot to latch a gate, and fed the children nothing but hardtack for supper because I couldn't figure out the damn stove. Despite herself, Lila let out a watery laugh. You're lying. I swear on my life. Samuel had to come bail me out. Stayed for 2 weeks, teaching me everything I should have paid attention to when Margaret was alive, but took for granted because she made it all look effortless. Lila lifted her head to look at him. He'd pulled out a chair and sat beside her, close enough that their knees almost touched. In the lamplight, the lines of weariness on his face seemed deeper, but his eyes were kind. How did you learn? She asked. How did you get through it? One day at a time. One meal, one chore, one crisis at a time. And I made mistakes. God, so many mistakes. But eventually I figured it out. You will too. The children will come around. Eli's already softening, even if he won't admit it. Did you see him watching you chase those chickens? He was dying to help, but his pride wouldn't let him. Give him another week, and he'll be showing you the trick to catching them without looking like a fool. And Clara? Caleb's expression grew more serious. Clara's harder. She's more like her mother, tender-hearted, easily hurt. She'll take longer to trust, but she'll get there. She needs to know you're not going anywhere, that you're not going to leave her like Margaret did. I'm not going anywhere, Lila said, and realized as she said it that it was true. Whatever happened, however hard this got, she was committed now. This was her life, for better or worse. I know, Caleb said softly. And deep down, they know it too. They're just scared to believe it. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the snap of the banked fire. Lila was acutely aware of Caleb's presence, his size, his warmth, the faint smell of wood smoke and honest sweat that clung to him. He was her husband, legally bound to her, and yet he felt like a stranger. A kind stranger, yes, but a stranger nonetheless. I should let you sleep, Caleb said eventually, rising from his chair. Tomorrow will be easier, I promise. Will it? He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. No, but you'll be better at handling it. After he left, Lila remained at the table a while longer, thinking about what he'd said. One day at a time. One meal, one chore, one crisis at a time. It wasn't inspiring or romantic or anything like what she'd imagined marriage would be. But it was practical, honest, and somehow that made it bearable. The days that followed established a new routine. Caleb showed her the trick to the temperamental stove, how to gauge when the oven was hot enough by holding her hand inside for a count of 3. Eli, true to his father's prediction, began grudgingly offering advice about the chickens, the garden, the best way to carry water without spilling. Clara remained distant, but she stopped actively crying when Lila approached, which felt like progress. And Rosie, sweet, oblivious Rosie, began to reach for Lila first when she needed comfort, her chubby arms extended trustingly, her gap-toothed smile bright as sunshine. 2 weeks after the wedding, a heavy snow came, trapping them all inside for 3 days. Cabin fever set in quickly, with the children bickering and Caleb pacing like a caged animal, worried about the livestock and unable to do anything about it. On the second night, Clara woke screaming from a nightmare. Lila heard it from her room and moved without thinking, rushing down the hall to the little girl's room. She found Clara sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, clutching her mother's shawl and gasping for breath. "Mama," the child sobbed. "I want my mama." Lila sat on the edge of the bed, aching to pull the little girl into her arms, but knowing it would be rejected. "I know, sweetheart. I know you do." "She was here," Clara hiccuped, "in my dream. She was singing to me, and then she left, and I tried to follow, but I couldn't find her anywhere." "That must have been so scary." Clara nodded miserably, then, to Lila's shock, leaned forward and pressed her face against Lila's shoulder. The gesture was so unexpected, so desperately needed, that Lila's throat closed with emotion. Slowly, carefully, she wrapped her arms around the small, trembling body and held on. "I've got you," she whispered. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." They stayed like that until Clara's sobs subsided into hiccups, then into the deep, even breathing of sleep. Lila tried to ease away, to let the child rest, but Clara's hand fisted in her nightgown, holding tight even in sleep. So Lila stayed, sitting on that narrow bed with Clara curled against her, and watched the snow fall outside the window. Her back ached and her legs went numb, but she didn't move. This child needed her, and for the first time since arriving at this ranch, Lila felt like she was actually helping rather than just getting in the way. When morning came, she woke to find Caleb standing in the doorway, watching them with an expression she couldn't read. "She had a nightmare," Lila explained quietly, careful not to wake Clara. "I didn't want to leave her alone." "I heard," Caleb said. "I was coming to check on her, but you were already here." He studied them for a long moment. "Thank you for staying with her. Of course, I know what she needed, and you gave it to her." He cleared his throat roughly. "Margaret used to sit with her just like that when she had bad dreams, for hours sometimes, until the sun came up. The comparison should have felt like pressure, like an impossible standard to meet. Instead, it felt like permission, like maybe, just maybe, she was doing something right." Clara stirred and opened her eyes, blinking up at Lila in confusion. For a moment, the little girl looked like she might pull away, might remember she was supposed to hate this stranger who'd invaded her home. But then she just sighed and burrowed closer, mumbling something that sounded like tired. "Few more minutes," Lila whispered, stroking her tangled hair. "Then we'll get up and make breakfast." "Can we have pancakes?" Clara asked sleepily. "If you help me make them." "Okay." Another yawn. "Miss Lila, I'm sorry I said I hated you. I don't really. I was just mad." Lila's vision blurred with tears. "I know, sweetheart. It's all right." When she finally carried a still drowsy Clara downstairs for breakfast, she found Eli already at the table, ostensibly reading but clearly waiting for them. He looked at his sister curled in Lila's arms, and something in his young face softened. "Clara had a nightmare," Lila explained. Eli nodded. "She gets them a lot, since—" He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. "Well, she's all right now, aren't you, Clara?" The little girl nodded against Lila's shoulder, then wiggled down and climbed into her chair. "We're making pancakes. I'm helping." "You'll probably burn them," Eli said, but there was no real meanness in it, just the teasing of an older brother. "Will not." "Will too." "Will not." And just like that, they were bickering like normal siblings. And Caleb was coming in from doing the morning barn chores, and Lila was at the stove trying to remember the proportions for pancake batter. It was chaos and imperfect, and nothing like the elegant household Margaret had surely run. But as Lila flipped slightly lopsided pancakes while Clara narrated her every move and Eli grudgingly set the table and Caleb poured coffee with a small smile playing at his lips, she thought maybe, just maybe, they were becoming something like a family. Not the family any of them had chosen. Not the family any of them had wanted, but a family nonetheless, stitched together by necessity and slowly, tentatively, learning to make it work. The fragile peace they'd built over pancakes and morning chores shattered 3 weeks later, when winter came roaring back with a vengeance. March in Montana Territory was a cruel mistress, teasing with hints of spring before plunging back into the brutal grip of cold. But this wasn't just cold, this was the kind of weather that killed livestock and trapped families in their homes for weeks. Lila woke to an orange glow flickering against her bedroom window. For a confused moment, still caught between sleep and waking, she thought it was sunrise. Then she smelled the smoke. She was out of bed and running before conscious thought caught up with action, her bare feet slapping against the cold floorboards. The hallway was dark except for that eerie, dancing light coming from below. She could hear shouting, Caleb's voice rough with panic and command. "Fire! North Barn's on fire!" Lila flew down the stairs so fast she nearly fell. The front door stood open, letting in a blast of frigid air and swirling snow. Through it, she could see flames tearing through the barn like a hungry living thing, bright orange against the pre-dawn darkness. The roar of it was deafening, punctuated by the terrified screaming of horses. Caleb was already outside, half-dressed, his shirt hanging open and his feet shoved into unlaced boots. He was running toward the inferno, and Lila's heart seized with terror. "The horses!" he was shouting. "Get the horses out!" Without stopping to think about her own bare feet or thin nightgown, Lila ran after him into the snow. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. Behind her, she heard Eli's voice, high and frightened. "Papa, Papa, what's happening?" "Stay in the house," Caleb roared back. "Keep your sisters inside." But Eli, being 8 and brave and terrified for his father, didn't listen. He came running barefoot like Lila, wearing only his nightshirt and carrying 2 empty buckets. "I can help," the boy shouted. "Papa, I can help." There was no time to argue. Caleb was already at the barn doors, wrestling them open despite the heat that must have been searing. The horses inside were going mad with fear, throwing themselves against their stalls. Smoke poured out in thick black clouds. "Cover your mouth," Caleb shouted to Lila, then plunged into the inferno. Lila grabbed Eli's arm before he could follow. "The well! We need water! Can you draw water?" "Yes, but—" "Then do it! Fast as you can!" She didn't wait to see if he obeyed, just grabbed an old horse blanket from the fence post, dunked it in the water trough. The top layer was frozen, but she smashed through it with her fist, barely feeling the impact, and wrapped it around her head and shoulders. Then she ran into the barn after Caleb. The heat was unbelievable. The smoke was worse. It clawed at her lungs, turned her eyes into streaming, burning agony. She couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, could only follow the sound of Caleb's voice and the horses' screams. "Easy now, easy!" Caleb was at the first stall, fighting to get a panicked mare out. The horse reared and kicked, nearly bashing his head in. "Damn it, easy!" Lila found the next stall by touch more than sight. Inside, a young gelding was throwing himself against the walls, whites of his eyes showing. She fumbled with the latch, got it open, then had to jump back as the horse bolted past her, nearly trampling her in his terror to escape. "2 more!" Caleb's voice was barely audible over the roar of the flames. The fire had spread to the hayloft now, and burning debris was starting to rain down. A piece of flaming wood landed on Lila's shoulder, and she beat it out with numb hands, barely registering the pain. They got the 3rd horse out together, Caleb leading while Lila pushed from behind, both of them coughing so hard they could barely breathe. The 4th horse was trapped. Part of the loft had collapsed, blocking the stall door. "Leave it!" Lila screamed, grabbing Caleb's arm. "We have to leave it." "Like hell!" Caleb was already climbing over the debris, heedless of the flames licking at his bare skin. "Not losing another one!" Lila wanted to drag him back, wanted to scream at him that his life was worth more than any horse, but there was no time. The barn was coming down around them, beams cracking with sounds like gunshots. She climbed after him, her feet finding purchase on burning wood, her hands blistering. Together, they got the last horse free. It bolted past them, singed but alive. Caleb grabbed Lila's hand, the first time he'd touched her so deliberately since their chaste wedding kiss, and pulled her toward the door. They almost made it. A support beam, weakened by fire, gave way with a shriek of tortured wood. Caleb saw it falling and did the only thing he could. He shoved Lila forward with all his strength, sending her sprawling into the snow outside. The beam missed her by inches. It caught Caleb across the shoulders. Lila heard herself screaming his name, heard it as if from a great distance. She was scrambling back toward the barn, back into the flames, but someone was holding her back. Eli. The boy had his thin arms wrapped around her waist, using all his slight weight to keep her from running back inside. "Let me go, your father! He's coming! Look, he's coming!" And he was. Caleb emerged from the smoke like something from a nightmare, his back and shoulders scorched, his face black with soot, his eyes blazing with pain and fury. He collapsed into the snow a few feet from the barn, and then the entire structure groaned and folded in on itself like a dying giant, sending up a shower of sparks that turned the snow orange. Lila broke free from Eli and threw herself down beside Caleb. "Are you hurt? Let me see, let me—" "I'm fine," he gasped, though he clearly wasn't. "Just need a minute." "You're not fine, you stubborn fool!" Tears were streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the soot. "That beam hit you. Grazed me. I've had worse." He was trying to sit up, wincing with every movement. "The horses?" All 4 got out. They're probably halfway to the next county by now, but they're alive. Good. He looked at the burning barn, his jaw clenched. It's completely gone. Nothing to save. You almost died in there. Lila's voice cracked with the force of her fear and anger. For horses! They're just animals, Caleb. You could have died. He turned to look at her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Those horses are worth 6 months of work. Without them, I can't plow, can't haul timber, can't do half the jobs that keep this ranch running. You think I was being brave? He laughed, a bitter sound. I was being practical. Dead rancher's no good to anyone, but neither is a rancher with no horses. Papa. Eli's voice was small and shaking. Papa, I tried to get water, but the well, I couldn't work the pump fast enough, and you did good, son. Caleb reached out with one blistered hand and ruffled the boy's hair. Real good. Kept your head, followed orders. I'm proud of you. Eli's face crumpled, and then he was crying, great gulping sobs that shook his small frame. Caleb pulled him close despite the obvious pain it caused, and Lila's heart broke watching them. This man and his son, holding each other in the snow while their livelihood burned. A sound made her turn. Clara stood in the doorway of the house, Rosie on her hip, both of them wide-eyed with shock. The baby was crying, more from being woken than from understanding what had happened, but Clara's face was white as the snow. Is Papa dead? She asked in a tiny voice. Is he dead like Mama? No, sweetheart. Lila got up, her legs shaky, and hurried over to them. No, he's fine. He's right there, see? He's all right. But Clara wouldn't be comforted until she saw for herself, until she'd wrapped her free arm around her father's neck and assured herself he was solid and real and breathing. They knelt there in the snow, this family, Caleb and his 3 children, covered in soot and tears, clinging to each other while the barn burned behind them. Lila stood apart, suddenly aware of her bare feet going numb in the snow, her nightgown soaked through and clinging to her skin. She'd run into a burning building for this family, had risked her life without a second thought, and yet she was still the outsider, still the one watching their grief from a distance. Lila, Caleb's voice called her back. He was looking at her over Clara's head, his blue eyes intense despite the pain she knew he must be feeling. Come here. She shook her head. You need to see to your children. I said come here. Something in his tone brooked no argument. Lila moved forward on feet she could barely feel and knelt in the snow beside them. Caleb's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her into their huddle, and suddenly she was part of it, part of their warmth, their tears, their collective relief at still being alive and together. Thank you, he said quietly, so only she could hear. For coming after me, for helping save the horses, for taking care of Eli, for being braver than anyone has a right to expect. I didn't think, Lila whispered. I just ran. I know. That's what made it brave. They stayed like that until the cold became impossible to ignore, until Rosie's crying turned frantic and Clara started shivering uncontrollably. Then Caleb, moving like a man 3 times his age, got them all back inside the house. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Lila stoked the fire until it roared, heating water for washing and for the burns that marked them all. Caleb's back and shoulders were the worst, long, angry welts where the beam had caught him, already starting to blister. His hands were burned too, though not as badly as Lila's. She hadn't even noticed her own injuries until she tried to fill the kettle and her palms screamed in protest. Sit down, Caleb ordered, his voice rough from smoke inhalation. Let me see your hands. Your back. We'll keep. Your hands won't if we don't tend them now. He was right. Her palms were a mass of blisters, some already broken and weeping. Caleb fetched Margaret's medicine box, of course it was Margaret's, and began cleaning the wounds with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough, scarred hands. This is going to hurt, he warned, then applied some kind of salve that felt like liquid fire. Lila bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, determined not to cry out. You should have told me they were this bad, Caleb said, his voice tight with what might have been anger or might have been something else. There wasn't time, and they're not as bad as yours. Mine are my own damn fault. Yours are because you followed me into that fire when you should have stayed safe. He finished bandaging her left hand and started on the right, his touch careful, almost tender. Why did you do that, Lila? Why risk yourself? Because you're my husband, she said simply. Because those are your horses, your barn, your livelihood. Because if something happened to you, what would become of the children, of this place? She met his eyes. Because I'm part of this family now, whether anyone wants me to be or not, and that means I don't stand by and watch while you run into danger alone. Something flickered across Caleb's face. Surprise, gratitude, something deeper that he quickly shuddered away. Most women would have stayed inside, would have kept the children safe and let the men handle it. I'm not most women, Lila said. My father raised me to pull my weight, to work as hard as my brothers. I may not be good at cooking or keeping house yet, but running into a burning barn? She managed a shaky smile. That I can do. God help me, Caleb said, but there was something almost like affection in his voice. I married a crazy woman. You married a practical one. The horses were worth saving. You said so yourself. He finished bandaging her hand, then sat back and scrubbed a hand over his face, wincing when the movement pulled at his burned back. That fire wasn't an accident. The words fell into the warm kitchen like stones into still water. Lila went cold. What do you mean? I mean someone said it. Deliberately. His jaw clenched. I've been ranching for 10 years, Lila. I know what an accident looks like. Overturned lantern, spark from a forge catching in hay. This wasn't that. This was accelerant. Could smell it the moment I opened those doors. Kerosene, probably. Someone poured it and lit it, wanting that barn to go up fast and hot. The Thorntons, Lila breathed. Can't prove it, but yeah, the Thorntons. He stood slowly, every movement careful. Been 3 homesteads burned in the last month, all of them holding out against Thornton's buyout offers. Mine's the biggest of the holdouts. This is a message. What kind of message burns innocent animals alive? The horror of it made Lila's voice shake. What kind of people? The kind who want this land and don't care what they have to do to get it. Caleb moved to the window, staring out at the smoldering ruins of his barn. Dawn was breaking now, painting the smoke pink and gold. The kind who think one widower with 3 young children will be easy to scare off. You're not alone anymore, Lila said quietly. You're not just a widower, you have a wife now. That changes things, doesn't it? Caleb turned to look at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived at this ranch, he truly seemed to see her, not as a necessary burden, not as Margaret's poor replacement, but as herself. As Lila. Young, yes. Inexperienced, certainly. But standing in his kitchen with her hands bandaged and her nightgown singed and her face still black with soot, she'd never looked more like someone who belonged. Yeah, he said slowly. I suppose it does. The children slept late that morning, exhausted by fear and excitement. Caleb and Lila sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee neither of them tasted, watching the sun rise over the wreckage of the barn. The horses had indeed scattered, but by mid-morning 3 of them had come back on their own, drawn by habit and hunger to the place they knew as home. Caleb managed to catch and stable them in the smaller shed that served as a secondary shelter, moving gingerly with his burned back. The 4th horse, the young gelding Lila had freed, turned up 2 days later at Samuel Ward's ranch 5 miles away. Samuel brought him back along with supplies and an offer of help that Caleb accepted with uncharacteristic grace. Can't rebuild alone, Samuel said bluntly, surveying the damage. Not with your back torn up like that. I'll bring my crew and we'll have a new barn up before spring planting. I can't pay. Didn't ask you to. Your family, Caleb. That still means something in these parts. Samuel's eyes moved to Lila, who was bringing out coffee and sandwiches for the men. Besides, seems like you've got your own crew now. That wife of yours run into a burning building with you? She did. Damn fool thing to do. That's what I told her. Samuel laughed. Well, she's fitting right in then. We Warda have never been known for our sense of self-preservation. He tipped his hat to Lila as she approached. Mrs. Ward, heard you gave those horses a fighting chance. Good work. Thank you, Lila said, pleased despite herself. Though I mostly just tried not to get trampled. Smart and honest. Caleb, you did better than you deserved with this one. Over the next week, Samuel was as good as his word. He arrived each morning with 2 ranch hands, and together they began clearing the debris and laying the foundation for a new barn. Caleb worked alongside them despite his injuries, refusing to be left out of the rebuilding. Lila kept them all fed. Her cooking had improved significantly through sheer necessity, and managed the children and the household while trying to ignore the way her bandaged hands ached with every task. Eli threw himself into helping with the reconstruction with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He hauled wood, carried tools, fetched water, and generally made himself indispensable. Lila watched him and understood. This was his way of fighting back, of proving that fire and whoever had set it couldn't break them. "He's too young to be working that hard," she said to Caleb one evening as they watched Eli drag another load of timber toward the building site. "He needs to do it," Caleb replied. "Needs to feel useful, like he's protecting his family. I was the same way at his age." He paused. "You could tell him to stop, Tell him it's too dangerous or he's too young. He'd listen to you now." "Would he?" "He would." Caleb's eyes met hers. "He talks about you. About how you ran into the fire without even putting on shoes. About how you didn't cry, even though your hands must have hurt something fierce. He thinks you're brave." Lila's throat tightened. "He said that?" "In his way. Eli doesn't give praise lightly. Neither does Clara, for that matter, but she's been asking for you every time she has a bad dream now. Says you know how to make them stop." "I don't really. I just sit with her until she falls back asleep. That's all she needs. Someone who won't leave." Caleb's voice grew quieter. "Margaret used to do that. Stay with them no matter how long it took, no matter how tired she was. I couldn't do it after she died. Couldn't bear sitting in their rooms, surrounded by all her things, her presence. So they cried alone until Mrs. Hawkins came. One more way I failed them." "You didn't fail them. You were grieving." "Grief isn't an excuse for neglecting your children. It's not neglect to be human, Caleb. You lost your wife. You were trying to keep everything from falling apart. You did the best you could." He looked at her for a long moment, something working in his jaw. "I don't know how you can be so understanding. About all of this. You should resent me, resent this whole situation. Instead, you're defending me. Why?" Lila thought about it, trying to find words for something she hadn't fully articulated even to herself. "Because resentment won't change anything," she said finally. "Because you've been honest with me from the start. You haven't pretended this is something it's not. You haven't made promises you can't keep. And because—" She trailed off, unsure. "Because," he prompted. "Because I see how hard you're trying. With the children, with the ranch, with me. Trying to give me space and respect and choice when you'd have every legal right to just take what you wanted. That matters, Caleb. It matters more than you know." The air between them felt suddenly charged, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Caleb took a step closer, and Lila's heart began to pound. "Lila, Papa!" Claire's voice shattered the moment. "Papa, Rosie's being bad again. She's eating the soap." Caleb closed his eyes briefly, something between frustration and amusement crossing his face. "I'll get her." He left, and Lila stood alone in the gathering dusk, her heart still racing, wondering what he'd been about to say, wondering what she'd wanted him to say. The new barn went up quickly under Samuel's experienced direction. It was smaller than the old one. They'd build it larger over time, Samuel said, as money and materials allowed, but it was sturdy and sound. More importantly, it was theirs, built with their own hands and the help of family who didn't charge for loyalty. The night they finished it, Samuel insisted they celebrate. "Not much of a party," he said, "but you survived fire and Thornton's intimidation, and that's worth marking." So they gathered in the new barn, Samuel and his 2 ranch hands, Caleb and Lila and the children, and shared a bottle of whiskey and sparkling cider for the young ones. Someone produced a harmonica, and soon rough music filled the raw wood space. Eli was showing off, climbing the new loft ladder like a monkey, while Clara danced with Rosie, making the baby giggle. The ranch hands were swapping stories, voices rising and falling. Samuel was giving Caleb a hard time about something, and Caleb was actually laughing, his face lighter than Lila had ever seen it. "Dance with me!" Lila turned to find Caleb beside her, his hand extended. "What?" Dance with me, he repeated. Here, now, in our new barn. I'm not very good. Neither am I. Doesn't matter. His blue eyes were warm in the lamplight. Please? She took his hand, the first time she'd initiated contact, and let him pull her into an approximation of a waltz. They were both terrible at it, stepping on each other's feet and laughing when they lost the rhythm entirely. But his hand was warm on her waist, and hers rested on his shoulder, and for just a moment they were simply a young man and woman dancing in a barn while their family watched and clapped. You're stronger than you look, Caleb said, echoing words from the night of the fire. Braver, too. So are you, Lila replied. Kinder, I mean, than you want anyone to know. He spun her, badly, nearly sending them both crashing into a support post, and they laughed together, slightly breathless. When the music ended and they broke apart, Lila's cheeks were flushed and her heart was racing, and for the first time since coming to Montana, she felt something like happiness. That night she lay in bed unable to sleep, replaying the evening in her mind. The warmth of Caleb's hand at her waist, the way he'd looked at her when he asked her to dance, as if she mattered, not as a housekeeper or nanny, but as herself. The sound of his laugh, rare and precious. They were becoming something, she and Caleb. Not husband and wife in the full sense, not yet, but something more than strangers bound by convenience. Partners, maybe? Friends, possibly. Two people learning to rely on each other, to trust, to share the burden of keeping a family and a ranch intact. It wasn't love. But standing in that new barn with its smell of fresh-cut wood and possibility, dancing badly while the children laughed and the lamplight glowed warm, Lila thought maybe, just maybe, love wasn't as impossible as she'd believed. Maybe, given enough time, enough shared battles, enough moments of seeing each other truly, it could grow into something real. She fell asleep thinking about Caleb's smile and woke to screaming. Lila was moving before she was fully awake, her feet hitting the cold floor as Clara's screams tore through the house. Not a nightmare this time. This was different, higher-pitched, edged with real pain. She grabbed her robe and ran, nearly colliding with Caleb in the hallway. His hair was wild from sleep, his shirt half-buttoned. "Clara!" he shouted, already running toward his daughter's room. They found her sitting up in bed, clutching her left arm and crying so hard she could barely breathe. Even in the dim light from the hallway, Lila could see the angry red rash spreading from Clara's wrist to her elbow, raised welts that looked hot and painful. "What happened?" Caleb demanded, dropping to his knees beside the bed. "Clara, sweetheart, what happened?" "It hurts," the little girl sobbed. "It hurts so bad, Papa." Lila lit the bedside lamp with shaking hands and examined the rash more closely. It looked like contact dermatitis, possibly from poison oak or ivy, though how Clara could have gotten into it in early spring was a mystery. Unless... Her mother's shawl, Lila said suddenly. "Where is it?" Clara pointed to where the faded fabric lay crumpled on the floor beside her bed. Lila picked it up carefully and saw the problem immediately. Tiny insects, so small they were barely visible, crawling through the fibers. Mites, probably, or some other parasite that had taken up residence in the old wool over the winter. "The shawl's infested," she told Caleb. "She must have been clutching it when she fell asleep. They bit her." "No!" Clara's scream was pure anguish. "Not Mama's shawl. You can't take Mama's shawl." "Clara, it's making you sick." "I don't care. It's all I have left of her." The little girl was hysterical now, reaching for the shawl with her good arm while Caleb tried to hold her still. "Give it back. Give it back." "Sweetheart, listen to me," Caleb said, his voice firm but gentle. "We're not throwing it away. We'll clean it, get rid of the bugs, and then you can have it back, I promise. But right now we need to take care of your arm." "You're lying. You just want to take her things away like you took her away." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. Lila saw him flinch, saw the color drain from his face. "Clara, that's not... I didn't..." But Clara was beyond hearing him, lost in pain and grief and 5-year-old rage at a world that had taken her mother and now threatened to take the last piece of her she had left. She thrashed in his arms, sobbing so hard Lila was afraid she'd make herself sick. "Let me try," Lila said quietly, moving closer. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but the helplessness in his eyes won out. He stepped back, his jaw clenched tight, and let Lila take his place. "Clara, look at me," Lila said, keeping her voice calm and steady. "Look at me, sweetheart." It took a moment, but eventually Clara's red, swollen eyes focused on Lila's face. "I know how much that shawl means to you," Lila continued. "I know it's special because it was your mama's, because it smells like her, and feels like her, and keeps her close. I understand that." "Then why are you taking it?" Clara hiccuped. "Because right now it's hurting you, and your mama wouldn't want that. She wouldn't want you to be in pain, even to keep something of hers." Lila gently took Clara's injured arm, examining the welts. "But here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow, we'll wash the shawl in very hot water with special soap. We'll hang it in the sunshine to dry. We'll make sure every single bug is gone. And then we'll put it in a special box wrapped in paper that smells like lavender, just like your mama used to do. That way it stays safe and clean, and you can take it out whenever you want to feel close to her. Does that sound fair?" Clara sniffled, considering. "Can I really have it back?" "I promise. But right now we need to put something on your arm to make it stop hurting. Can you be brave for me?" "Will it hurt more?" "No, I promise it won't hurt more. It might even feel better." Clara nodded slowly, exhaustion and pain winning out over her earlier hysteria. Lila sent Caleb for cool water and clean cloths while she carefully cleaned the bites with gentle hands. Clara whimpered but didn't pull away, watching Lila's face as if looking for signs of deception. "My mama used to sing when I was hurt," Clara said quietly. "Do you know any songs?" Lila's throat tightened, but she nodded. "I know a few. What kind would you like?" "Something happy. Mama always said happy songs made the hurt go away faster." So Lila sang, her voice soft and slightly off-key, an old folk song her own mother had taught her about a girl and a river and a sunny summer day. She sang while she applied the salve from Margaret's medicine box, while she wrapped Clara's arm in clean bandages, while Caleb stood in the doorway watching with an expression she couldn't read. By the time the song ended, Clara's eyes were drooping. "That was nice," she murmured. "Different from Mama's songs, but nice." "Thank you, sweetheart. Now try to sleep. Your arm will feel better in the morning." "Miss Lila?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry I said that. About Papa taking Mama away. I know he didn't. I know she just left." "I know you know that, baby. You were just scared and hurting. It's okay. Can you stay? Like you did before?" Lila glanced at Caleb, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Of course I'll stay." She settled into the chair beside Clara's bed, pulling a quilt over her lap. Within minutes, the little girl was asleep, her breathing deep and even despite the bandaged arm. Lila expected Caleb to leave, to return to his own room, but instead he pulled up another chair and sat beside her in the darkness. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to Clara breathe, watching the moonlight paint silver squares on the floor. Finally, Caleb spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's right, you know. What she said about me taking Margaret away, I did take her away, not on purpose, but Caleb, don't. She died giving birth to Rosie. Bled out before the doctor could get here from town. If we'd stopped at 2 children, if I'd been more careful, if I'd gotten the doctor sooner, you can't think like that." Lila reached out in the darkness and found his hand, lacing her bandaged fingers with his scarred ones. "You can't torture yourself with what-ifs. Women die in childbirth. It's terrible and unfair and wrong, but it happens. It's not your fault." "She begged me not to have another baby," Caleb said, and his voice broke on the words. "After Clara, she begged me, said she couldn't go through it again, that it was too hard on her body. But I wanted a son. Wanted Eli to have a brother. So I convinced her, wore down her resistance with talk of family and legacy, and all the selfish reasons men use to get what they want. And then Rosie came, and Margaret died, and Eli has a sister instead of a brother, and my selfishness killed the woman I loved." Tears were streaming down his face now, visible in the moonlight. Lila had never seen him cry, had thought maybe he couldn't anymore, that grief had burned that capacity out of him. But here he was, breaking apart in the darkness beside his daughter's bed, finally giving voice to the guilt that had been eating him alive for over a year. "Did Margaret blame you?" Lila asked quietly. "Before she died, did she say it was your fault?" She couldn't speak at the end, lost too much blood. But before, when Rosie was born, when Margaret knew she was dying, what did she say? Caleb was quiet for so long, Lila thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she said to take care of the children, to make sure they knew she loved them. She said she was sorry she couldn't stay. She apologized to you? Yes. Then she didn't blame you, Caleb. She was scared and dying, and her last thoughts were for her children and her husband. Not for recriminations. Not for anger, just love. Lila squeezed his hand. You have to forgive yourself, for her sake, if not for yours. For the children's sake, for everyone's sake. I don't know how. Neither do I. But maybe we can figure it out together. One day at a time, one crisis at a time, just like everything else. He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it, the beginning of it. The tiny seed that, given time and care and the shared weight of their struggles, might grow into something real and lasting. I don't deserve you, he said softly. You should have had better. A young man who could court you properly, who could give you a real wedding and a real marriage and all the things young women dream about. Instead, you got me, a broken widower with 3 traumatized children and a ranch that's barely holding together. Maybe I don't want what young women are supposed to dream about, Lila replied. Maybe I want this, messy and hard and imperfect as it is. Maybe I want a man who runs into burning buildings for his horses, who works himself to exhaustion to provide for his family, who sits up in the dark crying because he still loves the wife he lost. That's not broken, Caleb. That's human. The space between them seemed to shrink without either of them moving. Lila could feel the warmth of him, smell the faint scent of wood smoke and soap that clung to his skin. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Lila, he breathed, and it sounded like a prayer and a question all at once. Yes? But whatever he'd been about to say was lost as Eli appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. What's wrong with Clara? I heard her screaming. The moment shattered. Caleb cleared his throat and stood, putting distance between himself and Lila. She's fine now. Bug bites from her mother's shawl. Lila took care of it. Eli moved closer, peering at his sleeping sister. Is she going to be okay? She'll be fine by morning, Lila assured him. Just needed some medicine and someone to sit with her, like you did before, when she had the nightmare. Eli's eyes moved between his father and Lila, and something passed across his young face, understanding, perhaps, or acceptance. You're good at that, taking care of her. I try. Mama was good at it too, but He struggled for words. You're different, but still good. That's okay, I think. It was perhaps the highest praise the boy could give, and Lila felt her eyes sting with tears. Thank you, Eli. That means a lot. He nodded, then looked at his father. Papa, I'm glad you married her. I thought I should tell you that. I was wrong before, about not wanting her here. He paused, then finished in a rush. She's brave and she works hard and she makes you smile sometimes. So I'm glad. Caleb's expression was a complicated mix of emotions, pride and grief and hope all tangled together. So am I, son. So am I. After Eli returned to bed, Caleb and Lila remained in Clara's room until dawn began to lighten the windows. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. Sometimes Caleb would check Clara's bandages or adjust her blankets. Sometimes Lila would hum snatches of songs. Mostly they just sat together in comfortable silence, 2 people learning to share the weight of caring for children who needed them both. When morning finally came, Caleb stood and stretched, his back cracking audibly. I should get started on chores. We're behind on everything after the barn business. I'll make breakfast, Lila said. Something special. To celebrate Clara getting better and Eli's declaration. Caleb smiled, and it transformed his tired face into something almost boyish. He surprised me. Been carrying around so much anger, I thought it might never ease. He just needed time. They all did. They still do, probably, but we're getting there. We, Caleb repeated softly, as if testing the word. I like the sound of that. He left, and Lila sat with sleeping Clara a few minutes longer, thinking about the night that had passed, About Caleb's tears and confessions, about the moment when they'd almost, kissed? Admitted something neither of them was ready to name? About Eli's acceptance and the way Caleb's hand had felt in hers, strong and warm and right. They were building something, all of them together. Not the family any of them had planned or wanted, but a family nonetheless, patched together from grief and necessity and slowly, tentatively, from something that might eventually become love. The days that followed took on a new rhythm. Spring was finally, truly arriving, the snow melting in rushing streams, the ground thawing enough to begin preparation for planting, the world turning green with astonishing speed. Caleb worked from dawn until dark, and Lila worked alongside him when she could, learning the rhythms of ranch life, the endless cycle of planting and tending and harvesting that kept them fed and housed. Clara's arm healed quickly, and true to her word, Lila had washed the shawl and stored it safely in a cedar box lined with lavender-scented paper. Clara checked on it daily at first, as if afraid it might disappear. But gradually the visits became less frequent as she learned to trust that it would be there when she needed it. Eli had become Lila's shadow during outdoor work, teaching her with the careful patience of someone twice his age how to recognize which plants were weeds and which were crops, how to tell if a chicken was broody, how to handle the goats without getting butted. He still missed his mother, they all did, but the sharp edge of his grief seemed to have dulled, replaced by something softer and more manageable. And Rosie, oblivious to all the complicated emotions swirling around her, grew more confident on her feet every day. She'd taken to following Lila around like a determined duckling, babbling Lila with increasing clarity and reaching for her with perfect trust. As for Caleb and Lila, they circled each other like wary dancers learning a new step. He found excuses to work closer to the house, to come in for coffee in the middle of the afternoon, to linger at the supper table long after the children had been put to bed. She found herself watching for him, listening for his footsteps, feeling her heart quicken when his hand would brush hers passing a plate or reaching for the same tool. They didn't talk about it, didn't acknowledge the growing warmth between them or the way their separate rooms had started to feel like a choice rather than a necessity. But it was there, building slowly, patiently, like snow accumulating on a roof, inevitable and increasingly impossible to ignore. 3 weeks after the barn fire, a rider came from town bearing news and mail. Among the letters was one addressed to Caleb in an official-looking hand. He opened it at the kitchen table while Lila kneaded bread dough, and she watched his face go pale as he read. "What is it?" she asked, her hands stilling. "Thornton." Caleb's voice was flat. "He's making a formal offer to buy the ranch. Says he'll give me a fair price and that I should consider it carefully, given the recent setbacks. Setbacks. That's what he calls arson? Can't prove it was arson. That's the problem." Caleb crumpled the letter in his fist. "He knows it too. Knows I can't prove a damn thing, so he can burn my barn and then pretend he's doing me a favor by offering to buy me out." "What will you do?" "Tell him to go to hell, same as always." But something in his voice lacked conviction. He stood and moved to the window, staring out at the land. His land, bought with sweat and blood and Margaret's life. But he's not wrong about the setbacks. "The barn fire cost us 6 months of saved money. We're going to be tight this year, Lila. Might not make it if we have a bad harvest." "Then we'll make it work," Lila said firmly. "We'll plant every inch we can. We'll work harder. We'll do whatever it takes. But we're not selling to the man who tried to burn us out." Caleb turned to look at her, something like wonder in his eyes. "You keep saying we, like this is your fight too. It is my fight. This is my home now. My family. My land as much as yours, legally speaking." She came to stand beside him at the window. "I didn't choose to come here, but I'm choosing to stay. I'm choosing to fight for it, and I'm choosing to fight alongside you." "Why?" The question was barely a whisper. "Why would you do that? You could leave. Could go back to your family or make your own way. You're young, Lila. You have options I don't have. Because leaving would feel like running away, and I'm tired of running, because the children need me. Because this place," she gestured at the view beyond the window, the mountains and sky and endless possibility. "This place feels like it could be home, if I let it. And because Because, he prompted, just as he had that night beside Clara's bed. Lila turned to face him fully, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Because you matter to me. Not as an obligation or a duty or a transaction, as a person, as a man I'm coming to know and respect, and she faltered, uncertain how far to go. And? His blue eyes were intense on hers, his face inches away. And care for, she finished quietly. More than I probably should, given how little time has passed. But I can't help it. You're good and decent and trying so hard to hold everything together, and I want to help. I want to be the person standing beside you when things get hard. She didn't get to finish. Caleb closed the distance between them and kissed her. Not the chaste, brotherly kiss from their wedding, but a real kiss, deep and hungry and full of all the longing they'd both been trying to ignore. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones, and Lila melted into him, her flour-dusted hands gripping his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, he admitted. Ever since the night of the fire when you ran into those flames like some kind of avenging angel. Maybe even before that. But I didn't think I had the right. Why not? Because you deserve better than a quick grab in the kitchen while the children are napping. You deserve to be courted properly, romanced, swept off your feet by someone who… Caleb. Lila silenced him with a finger against his lips. Stop telling me what I deserve. Let me decide that for myself. And what I've decided is that I want this. Want you. Not some fantasy version of you, not some perfect suitor who doesn't exist. Just you, exactly as you are. I'm still grieving Margaret, he said honestly. I don't know if I'll ever stop completely. She was my first love, the mother of my children. I can't pretend she didn't exist or that I don't still miss her. I'm not asking you to. I'd be worried if you didn't miss her. She was important. She mattered. She deserves to be remembered. Lila took his hands in hers. But she's gone, Caleb. And we're here. And I hope, there's room in your heart for both. For the love that was and the love that could be. He studied her face for a long moment, and she could see him working through it, sorting his feelings, trying to reconcile his past with his present. Finally, slowly, he nodded. I'd like to try. If you're willing to be patient with me, to understand that some days will be harder than others, I'd very much like to try. I can be patient, she smiled. I've gotten pretty good at it, actually. You're not an easy man to live with, Caleb Ward. No? His lips quirked, and here I thought I was a delight. You're stubborn and gruff, and you work too hard, and you never talk about your feelings unless forced to. Sounds terrible. Why do you want me again? Because you're also kind and loyal and brave, and you make your children feel safe even when you're falling apart inside. Because you gave me choice when you could have taken advantage. Because you dance terribly, but you do it anyway. She stood on tiptoe and kissed him softly. And because when you smile, really smile, your whole face lights up, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Caleb gathered her close, burying his face in her hair. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet kitchen while bread dough rose and sunlight streamed through the windows, and somewhere in the house, children played and laughed and slowly learned to be whole again. I don't know how to do this, Caleb admitted against her hair. How to be a husband to you when I'm still figuring out how to be a widower. How to make you happy when I barely know how to make myself functional. We'll figure it out together, same as everything else. Lila pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But Caleb, I need you to know something. I'm not her. I'm never going to be her. I'll make different mistakes, have different strengths, do things my own way. And if you're looking for a replacement for Margaret, you're going to be disappointed. I know you're not her, Caleb said firmly. And I don't want you to be. You're Lila, fierce and brave and stubborn in your own right. You ran into a burning building in your nightgown. You sit with my daughter through nightmares. You stood up to me when I was being an ass about expectations and dignity. You're entirely yourself, and that's exactly who I want. The words settled something in Lila's chest, some deep fear she hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. She wasn't a replacement, wasn't a poor substitute. She was herself, valued for who she was, rather than who she could never be. So what happens now? She asked. Do we tell the children? Change the sleeping arrangements? Figure out how to actually be married? Caleb considered. We take it slow. Keep talking. Keep being honest with each other. The children are adjusting well, but they're still fragile. We don't want to confuse them or make them feel like I'm betraying their mother's memory. Agreed. So we just continue as we are. But knowing that this, she gestured between them, is real? That we're choosing it? Yes, with one addition. He took her left hand and ran his thumb over her empty ring finger. I never gave you a wedding ring, didn't have one to give, and it seemed wrong to offer Margaret's. But I'd like to remedy that, if you're amenable. Nothing fancy, but something that marks you as mine and me as yours. I'd like that, Lila said softly. Very much. They were interrupted by Rosie's wails from upstairs. Nap time was over, clearly, and the spell broke. But as Caleb headed up to get the baby and Lila returned to her bread dough, something fundamental had shifted. They weren't just two people sharing a house and children and survival anymore. They were partners choosing each other, building something deliberate and real from the ruins of what they'd both lost. It wasn't the love story Lila had dreamed of as a girl. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping declarations, no promises of eternal devotion, just two damaged people deciding that together they might be stronger than they were apart. That the life they could build, imperfect and complicated as it was, might be worth fighting for. And as spring deepened into early summer and the ranch came back to life around them, that decision, that choice, began to feel less like surrender and more like victory. The ring arrived on a Tuesday in late June, delivered by the same rider who brought mail from town. Caleb had ordered it 3 weeks earlier from a jeweler in Helena, paying with money he'd set aside from selling 2 steers, money they probably couldn't afford to spend, but which he'd insisted was worth every penny. He presented it to Lila that evening after the children were asleep, leading her out to the porch where the summer twilight painted everything gold and purple. The ring was simple, a thin band of gold with a tiny wildflower engraved on the inside, and when he slipped it onto her finger, his hands were shaking. It's not much, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But it's yours. You're mine, and I'm yours, and I wanted the world to know it. Lila looked at the ring through tears, turning her hand so the gold caught the fading light. It's perfect, she whispered. Absolutely perfect. He kissed her then, slow and deep, his hands gentle on her face. They'd been stealing moments like this for weeks now. Quick kisses in the barn, hands held under the supper table, long conversations on the porch after dark. But they'd been careful, discreet, not wanting to confuse the children or move too fast. The ring, though, changed things, made their intentions clear and permanent. Papa? Eli's voice came from the doorway, and they broke apart to find all 3 children standing there in their nightclothes. Eli's eyes went immediately to Lila's hand, to the gold band glinting in the twilight. Are you really married now? We've been married since February, Caleb said carefully. But yes, I suppose we're really married now. Does that bother you? Eli was quiet for a long moment, his young face serious. Then he shook his head. No, I think Mama would be happy. She wouldn't want you to be alone forever. And Miss Lila is... He struggled for words. She's good. She takes care of us. She makes you smile. I think that's what Mama would want. Clara pushed past her brother and threw her arms around Lila's waist. Does this mean you're staying forever? You won't go away like Mama did? Lila's throat tightened as she knelt down to Clara's level. I'm staying forever, sweetheart. I promise. I'm not going anywhere. Good. Clara's grip tightened. Because I love you. Not the same as Mama, but still love. Is that okay? Oh, sweetheart, that's more than okay. That's everything. Lila looked up at Caleb through tears and saw his own eyes shining. I love you too. All of you, so much. Rosie, not to be left out, toddled over and patted Lila's leg. Mama, she said clearly, and the word hung in the air like a benediction and a challenge all at once. Lila's breath caught. It was the first time Rosie had called her that, and she didn't know if she had the right to accept it. She looked at Caleb, uncertain, but he was smiling through his tears. It's all right, he said softly. She doesn't remember, Margaret. You're the only mother she knows, and that's— His voice broke. That's how it should be. So Lila gathered Rosie into her arms along with Clara, and Eli came and stood beside his father, and they were a family, imperfect and patched together, and nothing like what any of them had planned, but real and whole and theirs. The next morning brought news that shattered their fragile peace. Samuel Ward arrived before breakfast, his horse lathered from hard riding, his face grim. Caleb met him in the yard, and Lila watched from the kitchen window as Samuel spoke urgently, gesturing toward town. Whatever he was saying made Caleb's face go hard and dangerous. When they came inside, Samuel nodded to Lila but spoke to Caleb. You need to come to town, today. Thornton's spreading lies, saying you set that barn fire yourself for insurance money. Says you're trying to defraud the bank and that you're not fit to keep your ranch or raise your children. That's ridiculous, Lila said immediately. We almost died in that fire. Caleb was burned saving the horses. I know it's lies, Samuel interrupted. Everyone who knows you knows it, but Thornton's got the sheriff's ear, and there's going to be a hearing. If you don't show up to defend yourself, they might actually believe him. Caleb's jaw clenched so hard Lila could see the muscle jumping. When? This afternoon, 2 o'clock at the courthouse. Then I'll be there. He looked at Lila. Can you manage things here? With the children and the animals? Of course, but Caleb— She moved closer, lowering her voice. Should I come with you, as your wife? Wouldn't it help to show that you have a stable household, that you're not— No. His voice was firm. I won't bring you into town to be gawked at and gossiped about. This is my fight. It's our fight, Lila corrected. Everything here is ours now, remember? That includes the battles. Samuel cleared his throat. She's right, brother. Might actually help your case to have your wife there. Shows you're settled, responsible. Not some desperate widower making bad decisions. Caleb looked between them, clearly torn. Finally he nodded. All right. But we'll need someone to watch the children. I won't bring them into this mess. I'll stay, Samuel offered. The young ones know me. They'll be fine for a few hours. So it was settled. Lila changed into her best dress, the same dark blue wool she'd worn for her wedding, and tried to tame her hair into something respectable. Caleb hitched up the wagon, his movements sharp with barely controlled anger, and they set off for Willow Bend. The ride was tense and mostly silent. Lila tried several times to start a conversation, but Caleb's responses were monosyllabic, his attention fixed on the road ahead and whatever battle was coming. Finally, about halfway to town, she put her hand over his on the reins. Talk to me, she said quietly. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking that Thornton's a snake who's trying to destroy everything I've built. I'm thinking that Margaret died to give me these children and this land, and I'll be damned if I let some rich cattle baron take it all away with lies and legal tricks. His voice was tight with fury. I'm thinking about what I'll do if they actually believe him, if they try to take my children, or my ranch, or— They won't, Lila said firmly, because everyone who knows you knows what kind of man you are. Honest, hardworking, a good father. They'll see through Thornton's lies. Will they? Or will they see what Thornton wants them to see? A desperate man who'd do anything to hold on to what's his. Then we'll show them the truth, together. She squeezed his hand. You're not alone in this, Caleb. Not anymore. The courthouse was packed when they arrived. It seemed like half of Willow Bend had turned out for the hearing, drawn by the promise of drama and the chance to see one of their own face down the powerful Thornton Cattle Company. Lila recognized faces from church, from the general store, from the brief visit she'd made to town for supplies. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked merely curious. A few looked hostile, as if they'd already decided Caleb was guilty. Thornton himself was there, of course, a heavy-set man in his 50s with cold eyes and an expensive suit. He stood with the sheriff and a man in spectacles who must be his lawyer, looking supremely confident. When he saw Caleb and Lila enter, his lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Ward!" he called out, his voice carrying across the crowded room. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you might have more sense than to show your face." "I'm here to defend my name and my property," Caleb said evenly. "Something you'd know nothing about, seeing as you prefer to tear down other men's reputations rather than build your own." A murmur ran through the crowd. The sheriff, a lean, gray-haired man named Patterson, stepped between them. "That's enough. We're here for a hearing, not a brawl. Everyone take your seats." The proceeding was informal but no less intimidating for that. Sheriff Patterson sat at the front of the room like a judge, with Thornton's lawyer presenting evidence and making arguments. Caleb and Lila sat on a rough bench, and she felt every eye in the room on them, weighing, judging, speculating. Thornton's lawyer was smooth and persuasive. He painted a picture of a man desperate to escape mounting debts, willing to destroy his own property for insurance money. He brought up the fact that Caleb had recently married a much younger woman, suggesting financial desperation had driven that decision too. He implied that Caleb was unstable, reckless, not fit to manage a ranch or raise 3 young children alone. Through it all, Caleb sat rigid and silent, his jaw clenched, his hands fisted on his knees. Lila could feel the rage vibrating through him and laid her own hand over his, trying to anchor him, to remind him not to give Thornton what he wanted. An explosion, a violent outburst that would confirm every lie they were telling. When it was finally Caleb's turn to speak, he stood slowly, every line of his body radiating controlled fury. But when he spoke, his voice was calm and clear. "Everything Mr. Thornton's lawyer just said is a lie," he began. "I didn't set fire to my own barn. I didn't marry Lila for money. She didn't have any money. I'm not drowning in debt or looking for a way out. I'm just a rancher trying to make an honest living and raise my children right, and Thornton can't stand that because he wants my land." "Can you prove you didn't set the fire?" the sheriff asked. "Can he prove I did?" Caleb shot back. "Where's his evidence, his witnesses? All he's got is speculation and lies designed to pressure me into selling to him." The insurance investigator found evidence of accelerant, Thornton's lawyer interjected smoothly. "Kerosene poured deliberately. Someone set that fire, Mr. Ward. If it wasn't you, then who?" "Your employer's men," Caleb said flatly. "Same ones who've been burning out every small rancher who won't sell. This is just another attempt at intimidation, except this time you're using the law to do your dirty work instead of matches and kerosene." The room erupted in argument and speculation. Several voices called out support for Caleb, others for Thornton. The sheriff had to bang his gavel, borrowed from the judge in Helena, to restore order. "Do you have any proof of these accusations against Mr. Thornton?" Patterson asked when things quieted. Caleb's shoulders sagged slightly. "No, just a pattern. 3 fires in 2 months, all on properties Thornton wanted. But no proof any of his men were involved." "Then perhaps we should hear from some other witnesses," Patterson said. "Anyone here who has information relevant to this case?" Lila stood before she'd fully decided to speak. "I do." Every head in the room turned toward her. Caleb looked shocked, reaching for her arm as if to pull her back down, but she stepped away from the bench and moved to the front of the room. "Mrs. Ward," the sheriff said with some surprise, "you have testimony to offer?" "I do. I was there the night of the fire. I ran into that barn alongside my husband to save the horses. I saw his burns, felt the heat, smelled the accelerant, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that Caleb Ward did not set that fire." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, addressing not just the sheriff, but the entire room. "I've lived with this man for 4 months now. I've watched him work himself to exhaustion every single day to provide for his children and keep his ranch running. I've seen him grieve for the wife he lost, struggle to be both mother and father to 3 young children, and fight to maintain his dignity and his property in the face of constant pressure from men like Mr. Thornton." She turned to face Thornton directly, and something in her expression made the large man actually step back. "My husband is many things. He's stubborn and proud and sometimes too independent for his own good, but he is not a liar, and he is not an arsonist. He's an honest man being targeted by someone who wants to take what he's built, and I won't stand by and watch him be destroyed by lies." The room was silent now, every person transfixed by this young woman with soot still probably embedded under her fingernails, defending her husband with fierce conviction. "Furthermore," Lila continued, "I can tell you exactly what my husband was doing in the hours before that fire was set. He was with his family. We had supper together at 6 o'clock. He helped me put the children to bed at 7. He worked on his account books in the study until nearly 10, and I know this because I brought him coffee twice. Then he checked the animals in the barn, as he does every night," came inside, and went to bed. He was asleep when the fire started. I know because his room is directly across the hall from mine, and I heard him come in that night. She was carefully not mentioning that their rooms had separate doors, that their marriage was only recently becoming real in the fullest sense. That was private, none of these people's business. So unless Mr. Thornton is suggesting that I'm lying to protect my husband, Lila finished, then I think we can safely conclude that someone else set that fire. Someone who has a history of using fire to intimidate ranchers into selling their land. Thornton's lawyers started to object, but Pastor Williams stood up from where he'd been sitting near the back. "I'd like to speak if I may." "Go ahead, Pastor," the sheriff said. "I've known Caleb Ward for 10 years, Williams said in his quiet, steady voice. Married him to his first wife, baptized all his children, presided at Margaret's funeral. In all that time, I've never known him to be anything but honest and decent. He's a good man, Sheriff, the kind we should be protecting, not persecuting." Another voice rose from the crowd, Mrs. Patterson, the sheriff's own wife. "I knew Margaret Ward, she was a dear friend. And I know she'd turn in her grave to see her husband accused like this. Caleb loved that woman with everything he had. He nearly worked himself to death after she died trying to keep things going for those children. The idea that he'd destroy his own property, risk his own life and his new wife's life, is absurd." More voices joined in, one after another. Sam Pritchard, who owned the general store, testified that Caleb always paid his debts on time. Doc Henley, who'd tended the burns after the fire, confirmed they were severe and consistent with someone who'd fought to save his property, not destroy it. Even the banker, a thin, nervous man named Whitaker, admitted reluctantly that while Caleb's finances were tight, he wasn't in desperate straits and had never missed a payment. With each testimony, Thornton's confident expression cracked a little more. His lawyer tried to interject, to redirect, to cast doubt, but the tide had turned. The community had decided to protect one of their own, and there was nothing Thornton's money or influence could do against that unified front. Finally, Sheriff Patterson held up his hand for silence. "I've heard enough. Mr. Ward, I don't see any evidence that you set that fire, and I see considerable evidence that you're a man of good character being harassed by someone who wants your land. Unless Mr. Thornton can produce actual proof of arson on your part, witnesses, physical evidence, something beyond speculation, I'm dismissing these charges." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Caleb's knees seemed to buckle slightly, and Lila was there immediately, her arm around his waist, holding him steady. He turned to her with tears in his eyes and pulled her close, not caring who saw or what they thought. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "God, Lila, thank you." "I told you," she whispered back. "We're in this together, always." But Thornton wasn't finished. He pushed forward, his face red with fury, jabbing a finger at Caleb. "This isn't over, Ward. You think you've won? You think your little wife's pretty speech changes anything? I'll bury you. I'll make sure you lose everything. Your ranch, your children, your reputation." He didn't get to finish. Caleb had him by the collar, lifting the heavier man almost off his feet, his face transformed by rage. "You threaten my children again," he said, each word deadly quiet, "and I'll make you regret you ever set foot in Montana territory. Clear?" "Caleb," Lila grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back. "He's not worth it. Don't give him what he wants." For a long moment, Caleb held Thornton there, and Lila genuinely didn't know what would happen. Then slowly, he released him, shoving him away with enough force to make the older man stumble. "Get off my land," Caleb said. "Stay away from my family. And if one more building burns, if one more animal dies, if one more thing goes wrong on my ranch or any other ranch in this valley, I'll know who to blame and I'll come for you, law or no law." Thornton straightened his expensive suit, trying to regain his dignity, but fear had replaced the confidence in his eyes. He'd expected to face a desperate man. Instead, he'd found a man backed by a community, protected by a fierce young wife, and willing to fight to the death for what was his. "This isn't over," Thornton repeated, but the threat rang hollow now. "Yes," Caleb said quietly, "it is." The ride home was lighter despite their exhaustion. Lila leaned against Caleb's shoulder as he drove, and he kept one arm around her, holding her close. They talked about everything and nothing, the way Pastor Williams had defended him, Mrs. Patterson's fierce loyalty, the look on Thornton's face when the sheriff dismissed the charges. You were magnificent, Caleb said, for perhaps the 10th time. The way you stood up there and faced down that entire room, I've never seen anything like it. I was terrified, Lila admitted. My knees were shaking so hard I thought I'd fall down. But I couldn't just sit there and let them say those things about you. Not when I know the truth. What truth is that? That you're a good man. The best man I've ever known, actually. That you work harder than anyone should have to, care more deeply than you let on, and would do anything to protect the people you love. She looked up at him. That I'm proud to be your wife. Really, truly your wife, in every way that matters. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the middle of the road. The sun was setting behind them, painting everything gold and rose, and in that light, he looked younger, less burdened, almost happy. Lila Ward, he said solemnly, I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I swear I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. You already are worthy. You always have been. You just needed someone to remind you of that. He kissed her then, deep and slow and full of promise, and Lila thought that this moment, this man, this life they were building together was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty she'd endured to get here. When they finally arrived home, they found the children waiting anxiously on the porch with Samuel. Eli ran to meet them, his young face tight with worry. Did you win? Are we safe? Is Papa in trouble? We won, Caleb confirmed, scooping his son up despite the boy's protests that he was too old for such treatment. Sheriff dismissed all the charges. We're safe. Clara and Rosie joined the embrace, all of them tangled together in the twilight, laughing and crying and holding on. Samuel stood apart, grinning broadly. Knew you'd prevail, he said. Never doubted it for a minute. Liar, Caleb said affectionately. You were worried. Maybe a little, but I also knew you had the whole town on your side, and this fierce wife of yours. Speaking of which, he turned to Lila. Heard about your speech. Sounds like you gave old Thornton what for. I just told the truth, Lila said, embarrassed by the attention. Sometimes that's the most powerful weapon there is. Samuel tipped his hat to her. Welcome to the family, Lila. Officially and for real this time. Any woman who'll stand up to Thornton in front of the whole town is a ward through and through. After Samuel left and the children were finally, reluctantly, persuaded to go to bed, Caleb and Lila stood on the porch in the darkness. The ranch stretched out before them, their ranch now, truly and completely. The new barn stood solid and real, a testament to survival and rebuilding. The fields were planted and growing. The animals were fed and safe. Everything was as it should be. I have something for you, Caleb said suddenly. Wait here. He disappeared into the house and returned a moment later with a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a locket, silver, engraved with a delicate wild rose. It was my mother's, Caleb explained, his voice soft. Been in the family for 3 generations. I gave Margaret a different piece when we married, emerald earrings that had been my grandmother's. But this I kept, thinking I might give it to Clara someday. But I want you to have it. Want you to know you're not just my wife in name. You're family. You belong here, with us. Forever. Lila's hands shook as she took the locket. She opened it and found 2 tiny portraits inside. A man and woman she didn't recognize, painted in the style of decades past. My parents, Caleb said, died when I was 16. This is all I have left of them, and now I'm giving it to you because you've become as important to me as they were, as Margaret was, as the children are. You're part of this family's story now, Lila, part of its past, its present, and God willing, its future. I don't know what to say, Lila whispered. Say you'll stay. Say that no matter what comes, bad harvests or good, prosperity or hardship, easy times or hard, you'll stay with us. With me. I'll stay, Lila promised. Through everything. I choose this, Caleb. I choose you. I choose the children. I choose this life. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being survival and became something much more important. What's that? Home. She looked out at the ranch, the mountains beyond, the endless Montana sky full of stars. This is home, your home, and I'm never leaving. He fastened the locket around her neck with gentle hands, then turned her to face him. In the starlight, his eyes were luminous with emotion, love and gratitude and wonder all mixed together. I love you, he said, the words coming out rough and unpracticed, as if he hadn't said them in so long he'd forgotten how. I love you, Lila. Not the way I loved Margaret. That was different, belonged to a different time, a different version of me. But this is real and true and entirely yours. I love you. Tears streamed down Lila's face as she reached up to cup his cheek. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. I never thought, when I got on that stagecoach in Illinois, I never imagined I could feel this way, that I could be this happy. Neither did I, Caleb admitted. Thought I'd spend the rest of my life just going through the motions, doing what needed to be done but never really living again. Then you showed up, 18 years old and terrified and so damn brave, and you gave me a reason to want more than survival. You gave me hope. They kissed under the stars, and it felt like a beginning rather than just another step in a journey that had started with fear and obligation. When Caleb took her hand and led her inside, up the stairs, past her room to his own, Lila followed without hesitation. The door that had stayed closed between them for so long finally, truly opened, and what happened behind it was theirs alone, private and precious, and the final seal on vows they'd made in name but were only now making real. The months that followed were the happiest of Lila's life. Summer deepened into a riot of green and gold, the crops growing tall and strong. Caleb taught her to ride properly, and they'd sometimes take the horses out in the early morning before the children woke, racing across the fields with the wind in their hair and laughter on their lips. Eli was thriving, growing taller and more confident, taking on more responsibility around the ranch with pride. Claire had stopped crying for her mother every night, though she still kept Margaret's carefully preserved shawl in its box and would sometimes take it out to hold when she needed comfort. Rosie was walking steadily now, chattering constantly, calling Lila Mama and Caleb Papa with equal affection. They had struggles, of course. A summer storm damaged part of the roof, and they spent 2 weeks making repairs. One of the milk cows got sick, and they nearly lost her before Doc Henley's veterinary skills saved her. Money was always tight, each dollar stretched as far as it would go, but they faced everything together, Lila and Caleb, partners in every sense of the word. True to the sheriff's warning, Thornton kept his distance. There were rumors he'd turned his attention to properties further north, but nothing on their ranch or any neighboring property burned or was damaged. It seemed he'd learned that some fights weren't worth the cost. Some communities wouldn't be divided or intimidated. In October, Lila realized her monthly courses were late. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes or cause worry until she was certain. But as weeks passed and other signs appeared, tender breasts, morning nausea, a strange craving for pickles at breakfast, she could no longer deny what was happening. She told Caleb one evening after the children were asleep, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. He looked confused at first, then shocked, then terrified, and finally, slowly, joyful. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice shaking. "As sure as I can be without seeing the doctor, but yes, I'm sure." "When?" "Late spring, probably. May or early June." He was quiet for so long she started to worry. Then he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, and she felt his tears soaking through to her skin. "I'm so scared," he admitted. "After what happened with Margaret, after losing her that way, I'm terrified, Lila. I can't lose you too, I can't." "You won't," she promised, though she knew it was a promise she couldn't really make. Childbirth was dangerous. Women died. That was the reality. But she also knew she was young and strong and healthy, and Doc Henley was good at his work. "I'll be fine. We'll be fine. Trust me." "I do trust you. That's not the problem. The problem is I love you so much that the thought of losing you makes me want to lock you in the house and wrap you in cotton wool until this baby is safely here." "You'll do no such thing," Lila said firmly. "I'm pregnant, not fragile. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still running households and working and living their lives. I'll be careful, but I won't be coddled." "Stubborn woman. You knew that when you married me." They told the children together the next morning at breakfast. Eli looked confused, Clara excited, and Rosie oblivious. But when Caleb explained that come summer, they'd have a new brother or sister, Eli's face transformed with something like wonder. Really? A new baby? Really, Lila confirmed. Will it be a boy or a girl? We won't know until it arrives. Does it matter? Eli considered seriously. I guess not. Either way, I'll teach them everything I know, about the ranch and the animals and everything. That's very grown up of you, Caleb said, his voice thick with pride. Clara was already planning, talking about sharing her room and teaching the baby to draw and making sure it knew all about their mother Margaret in heaven. It was bittersweet hearing her talk about Margaret with such love while being equally excited about the new baby, but it was also exactly right. They weren't forgetting Margaret or replacing her. They were simply moving forward, carrying her memory with them while building new memories, new love, new life. The pregnancy progressed without major complications. Lila was sick in the mornings for the first few months, and Caleb would hold her hair back and bring her peppermint tea, his worry evident in every gesture. But by the time winter set in again, their second winter together, so different from the first, she was blooming, her belly round and obvious, her face glowing with health. On Christmas Eve, the whole family gathered around the tree Caleb and Eli had cut from the north pasture. They decorated it with strings of popcorn and dried apples, paper stars Clara had made, and a few precious ornaments that had survived from Margaret's time. Under the tree were simple gifts, a new doll for Clara, a pocket knife for Eli, a wooden horse for Rosie, new gloves for Caleb that Lila had painstakingly sewn. But Caleb had one more gift, something he'd been working on in secret for months. He brought out a wooden cradle, beautifully crafted and polished until it gleamed in the firelight. Made it myself, he said, setting it gently beside the tree. Every night after you fell asleep, I'd go out to the barn and work on it. Wanted it to be perfect. Lila ran her hands over the smooth wood, marveling at the craftsmanship. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. There's more. He gestured to the inside of the cradle, and she saw words carved into the headboard. For our future, with love from our past. And below that, 4 names. Eli, Clara, Rosie, and one more left blank, waiting for the baby that would arrive in spring. All our children, Caleb explained. The ones we had and the ones we're having. All together, all family. That's what this cradle represents. Continuity, connection, the past and the future all woven together. Lila couldn't speak through her tears, so she just held him while the children gathered around the cradle, touching it reverently, already arguing about who got to rock the baby first when it arrived. Later that night, after the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet except for the crackle of the dying fire, Caleb and Lila sat together on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "Really, truly happy?" "Happier than I ever thought possible," Lila answered honestly. "When I left Illinois, I thought my life was over, that I was being sentenced to exile to a life of drudgery and loneliness. Instead, I found—" She paused, searching for words adequate to describe it. "I found everything. Purpose, family, love, home. I found myself." "I found myself too," Caleb said. "Or maybe I found myself again. After Margaret died, I was just going through the motions, not really living. You reminded me how to live, how to hope, how to love." He kissed the top of her head. "You gave me back my life, Lila. Gave my children back their joy. I don't think I can ever repay that." "You don't need to repay it. We saved each other. That's how it works." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to embers, feeling the baby move between them, and thinking about the year that had passed and the year that would come. It hadn't been an easy road. There had been fires and accusations and grief and adjustment and 1,000 small struggles. But they'd faced everything together, grown stronger together, built something real and lasting together. The baby arrived on a warm day in late May, born in the upstairs bedroom with Doc Henley and Mrs. Patterson in attendance. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Caleb, pacing downstairs with the terrified children, thought he might actually lose his mind with fear. But when the baby's first cry finally pierced the air, strong and healthy and full of life, he collapsed in relief. Mrs. Patterson came down an hour later, beaming. "You have a son, Mr. Ward, and your wife is doing just fine. Tired, but fine." Caleb took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the room to find Lila propped up on pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up as he entered, and her smile was like the sun coming out. "Come meet your son," she said softly. He approached slowly, almost afraid, and looked down at the red, wrinkled face of his 4th child. The baby had a shock of dark hair like Caleb's, and when he opened his eyes, they were the same sky blue that all the Ward children shared. "He's perfect," Caleb breathed. "He is. I thought we could name him Thomas, after your father, if that's all right with you." "Thomas Ward." Caleb tested the name, found it right. "It's more than all right. It's perfect." The children were allowed in to meet their new brother, and they clustered around the bed with wide eyes and careful hands. Eli touched the baby's tiny fist with one finger, his face full of wonder. Clara declared that he was the most beautiful baby ever born and that she would protect him always. Rosie just wanted to know when he'd be old enough to play. That night, after everyone had settled and the house was quiet again, Lila and Caleb lay together in bed with Thomas sleeping between them in the cradle Caleb had made. They watched him breathe, marveling at this new life they'd created together, the symbol of everything they'd built. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Lila asked quietly. "When you picked me up from the station and I was so scared I could barely speak?" "All the time," Caleb admitted. "I think about how young you looked, how lost, how I almost sent you back because it felt wrong, keeping you here when you clearly didn't want to be. I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you gave me a chance to find my place here. I'm glad you gave me a chance, too, to prove I could be more than just a broken widower, to love again, to build a new life without forgetting the old one." He reached across the cradle to take her hand. "You know what the greatest gift was? Not that you saved my ranch or helped with my children or any of the practical things. The greatest gift was that you saw me, really saw me, and decided I was worth loving anyway. Of course you were worth loving. You always were. You just needed someone to remind you of that." As summer settled over Montana territory and the Ward Ranch thrived under the care of 2 people who'd learned to work as one, the story that had begun with fear and obligation transformed into something remarkable. The town of Willow Bend still talked about them sometimes, the widower and the girl bride who'd been given away at 18, still a virgin, to a stranger with 3 children. But they didn't tell that story with pity or scandal anymore. They told it as a love story, as a testament to resilience and second chances and the kind of courage it takes to build a life from ruins. They told it to remind themselves that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations, that loss doesn't have to mean the end, that families can be made as well as born. Leela and Caleb never forgot how they'd started, in duty and necessity, in grief and fear. But they chose every day to move beyond that beginning, to create something new and real and entirely their own. They raised 5 children together, the 4 they had and more that would come later. They built their ranch into something prosperous and proud. They grew old together, their love deepening with each shared sunrise and sunset, each crisis weathered, each joy celebrated. And years later, when their grandchildren would ask how they met, how their love story began, Lila would smile and take Caleb's weathered hand in hers and say, "We were given to each other by necessity, but we chose to stay with each other out of love. And that choice, that daily decision to choose love over convenience, partnership over obligation, hope over fear, that made all the difference." Caleb would nod, his blue eyes still sharp and bright even in old age, and add, "Your grandmother was given to me still a virgin at 18, to a widower with 3 children and a ranch full of ghosts. Everyone thought it would end in disaster. Instead, it became the greatest blessing of my life." And watching them together, still holding hands after decades, still looking at each other like the other was the most remarkable thing in the world, no one who heard the story could doubt that sometimes, just sometimes, the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most extraordinary endings. In Willow Bend, they stopped talking about the arrangement that had brought Lila and Caleb together. They stopped whispering about the age gap or the circumstances, or any of the things that had made the town gossip that first winter. Instead, they simply pointed to the Ward Ranch, thriving and prosperous, full of laughter and love, and said, "That's what it looks like when two people decide to make a life together, no matter how hard the beginning." And they were right. Because in the end, what shocked everyone wasn't how the story began, but how beautifully, triumphantly, it transformed into exactly what it was always meant to be. A love story for the ages, born from ashes and fear, growing through struggle and choice, and flowering into something that would be whispered about in Montana territory for generations to come. Not as a cautionary tale or a tragedy, but as proof that love, real, chosen, fought for love, could overcome anything, even the most impossible beginning.